Picture this. A king stands before his court, the weight of a nation on his shoulders. Should he go to war? Will the harvests fail? Is his reign blessed by the heavens? In this moment of immense pressure, he does not turn to his most trusted general or his wisest sage. Instead, he turns his gaze to a creature, a magnificent white elephant, a regal lion, a mysterious raven. He looks for a sign, a whisper from the gods themselves, interpreted through the behavior of an animal. For centuries, across countless cultures, the fates of empires and the legitimacy of rulers were believed to be written not in the stars alone, but in the actions of these creatures. This is the forgotten story of the lost animals that spoke to kings, the mythical interpreters of destiny who held the power to crown an emperor or bring a dynasty crashing down. We are about to embark on a journey into the very heart of royal power, a journey that will take us from the sun-baked temples of ancient Egypt to the misty towers of London, from the sprawling courts of Siam to the warrior camps of the Mongol steppes. We will meet creatures both real and legendary, from the sacred Apis bull whose health dictated the fortune of a pharaoh, to the benevolent Simurgh, a mythical bird who guided Persian heroes with its celestial wisdom. These animals were far more than simple pets or impressive symbols. They were active, vital participants in the theater of kingship, serving as living conduits to the divine. Their every action was a message, their very presence a political statement. A raven's call could signal an impending invasion, a white elephant's death could spark a rebellion, and a lion's roar could affirm a sultan's absolute authority. This was a world where the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was blurred, and the animal kingdom was seen as a direct line to the forces that shaped human destiny. In this video, we will uncover how these creatures were used as brilliant political tools, how their perceived connection to the gods was leveraged to consolidate power, command loyalty, and justify rule. We will explore the deep psychology behind this ancient practice, understanding why kings and queens felt the need to share their burden of leadership with a non-human voice. And we will follow the trail of these incredible stories right into our modern world, seeing how the legacy of these animal interpreters lives on in our national symbols, our coats of arms, and the epic fantasies we love today. So prepare to discover a hidden layer of history where the flutter of a wing or the gaze of a beast could alter the course of empires. The stage is set for us to step into the royal courts of the past and listen closely for the whispers of the creatures who, it was believed, held the secrets of destiny itself. To understand just how powerful a single animal could be, we must travel to the lush, vibrant kingdom of Siam, where the discovery of a white elephant was an event that could define an entire reign. These weren't just albino animals, they were creatures of profound spiritual significance, identified by a very specific set of auspicious physical characteristics described in ancient texts. Their skin had to be a pale, almost ethereal hue, their eyes a certain color, and even their toenails and the hair on their tails had to meet exacting standards. Finding one was like the heavens had personally delivered a seal of approval to the king. The moment a suitable elephant was located, it was an occasion for national celebration. The creature would be ceremoniously brought to the capital in a grand procession, treated not as a captured beast but as a revered guest of the highest honor. It was given a formal royal title, something like Noble Lord or His Majesty the Elephant, and provided with a palatial residence that often rivaled the living quarters of human royalty. It ate from gold plates, was attended by a dedicated staff of nobles and servants, and its every need was anticipated and met. The elephant became a central figure in royal ceremonies, a living, breathing symbol of the kingdom itself. Its health was a matter of state security. Court physicians monitored it closely, and its diet was meticulously planned. If the elephant thrived, it was seen as undeniable proof that the gods were pleased, that the rains would come, the harvests would be bountiful, and the kingdom would be safe from its enemies. This direct link between an animal's well-being and a nation's fortune placed the white elephant at the very center of political power. Kings understood this power intimately. The possession of one of these sacred animals was a potent tool for legitimizing their rule, especially for a new monarch seeking to solidify his claim to the throne. Historical chronicles from the Ayutthaya period, a golden age of Siamese history, tell of kings launching military campaigns with the explicit goal of capturing a rival's white elephant. These weren't simple raids, they were wars of destiny. To possess the elephant was to possess the mandate of heaven. A famous example is the conflict between King Nersuan and the Burmese crown prince in the late 16th century, which was steeped in this very symbolism. The struggle for regional dominance was, in many ways, a struggle to control these living omens. The elephant's distinctive color was deeply rooted in Buddhist tradition, where white universally represents purity, spiritual power, and a state of enlightenment. A king who had a white elephant in his court was, by extension, demonstrating his own moral and spiritual purity. He was showing his people and his rivals that he was in harmony with the cosmic order, a righteous ruler chosen by divine forces. This was public relations of the highest celestial order, but this system of belief had a dangerous flip side. The immense positive power of the white elephant was matched only by the catastrophic implications of its suffering or death. If the elephant fell ill, the entire court would be gripped with anxiety. Priests would perform rituals, and the king himself might engage in acts of personal merit and purification, desperately trying to correct whatever spiritual imbalance had caused the creature's decline. The death of a white elephant was a national disaster. It was interpreted as a clear, terrifying sign that the gods had withdrawn their favor. The king's spiritual connection was broken, his legitimacy was called into question, and the kingdom was seen as vulnerable. Such an event could trigger internal rebellions, with rival factions seeing it as their opportunity to challenge a suddenly weakened monarch. It could even invite invasion from neighboring kingdoms who perceived the omen as a signal that the time was right to attack. The life and death of this one animal, therefore, was a barometer for the entire nation's political and spiritual health. The white elephant of Siam stands as one of history's most powerful examples of an animal interpreter. It was more than a symbol, it was an active participant in the fate of the kingdom, a silent, majestic counselor whose very existence shaped the decisions of kings and the destiny of an entire people. This profound reverence, where an animal becomes the living embodiment of a kingdom's destiny, is a theme we will see resonate powerfully as we turn our gaze from the courts of Asia to the ancient empires of the Near East. But the concept of a living animal as a national symbol was not confined to Asia. Across the Indian Ocean, in the highlands of the Ethiopian Empire, another majestic creature held a position of even greater authority, woven directly into the sacred fabric of the nation's identity. Here, the Lion of Judah was far more than an emblem on a flag or a coat of arms. It was a physical, powerful presence within the royal court, believed to be a direct, living descendant of the biblical lion from which the monarchy claimed its divine right to rule. Emperors, most famously Haile Selassie in the 20th century, maintained lions within their palaces in Addis Ababa. These were not merely captive animals in a zoo, they were revered as sacred guardians, occupying a space somewhere between a living national relic and a divine intermediary. Their every action was observed with intense scrutiny. A lion's roar echoing through the palace corridors was not just a sound of the wild, it was a pronouncement. Court priests trained in the art of interpreting such signs would analyze the timing, the intensity, and the direction of the roar. Was it a warning of external threat? An affirmation of a proposed policy? Even the creature's posture and the focus of its gaze were read for meaning. A lion lying calmly and majestically in its enclosure might signal a period of peace and stability, while restless pacing could be interpreted as divine agitation, a sign that the kingdom was on an unwise path. This practice transformed the animal into a living, breathing oracle, a direct channel for messages from God concerning the state of the empire. This profound connection between the lion and the crown finds its ultimate expression in the Kebra Nagast, the glory of the kings, Ethiopia's foundational national epic. This ancient text provides a sacred origin story that inextricably links the animal to the monarchy's very legitimacy. It narrates the tale of the Queen of Sheba's visit to the wise King Solomon in Jerusalem. According to the epic, their union produced a son, Menelik I, who would become the first emperor of Ethiopia and founder of the Solomonic dynasty. When Menelik later visited his father, he was said to have been accompanied by a lion, a symbol of the tribe of Judah from which Solomon himself descended. This lion was not just a companion, it was a living testament to the royal bloodline, a divine seal of approval on this new branch of Davidic kingship. The Kebra Nagast effectively states that the emperors of Ethiopia were not merely political leaders, they were scions of a biblical house, and the Lion of Judah was their God-given emblem. This narrative provided an unshakable foundation for their authority for centuries, making the lion an essential part of the nation's spiritual and political DNA. The courage, nobility, and fearsome power of the lion were seen as qualities directly bestowed upon the ruler. An emperor was expected to embody the lion's heart, to be brave in battle, just in rule, and a protector of his people. The health of the lion in the palace was therefore not just a matter of animal welfare. It was a direct reflection of the health of the nation and the vigor of its leader. A strong, healthy lion meant a strong, healthy empire. A sick or lethargic lion, however, could send ripples of anxiety through the court, prompting soul-searching and ritual attempts to restore divine favor. This system of interpretation was remarkably formalized. Court chroniclers, the historians of their day, did not only record the deeds of emperors and the outcomes of battles. They also meticulously documented the behaviors of the royal lions. Their journals might note that on the eve of a major military campaign, the lion was particularly alert and vocal, which would be interpreted as a positive omen for victory. Conversely, if the animal seemed listless or turned away from envoys from a particular region, it might be seen as a warning against forming an alliance. This careful record-keeping turned the lion's life into a continuous text, a narrative of divine opinion on the unfolding events of the empire. The lion, therefore, served a dual purpose. It was both a potent symbol of a timeless, divinely ordained dynasty and a practical, if enigmatic, political advisor. Its presence provided a layer of spiritual legitimacy that was incredibly difficult for rivals to challenge. To oppose the emperor was to oppose the Lion of Judah itself, and by extension, the will of God as revealed through this sacred creature. This powerful fusion of myth and monarchy, where an animal's instinctual behaviors were decoded as celestial counsel, created a uniquely resilient form of kingship, one that endured in Ethiopia longer than almost anywhere else on earth. Now let us journey from the sun-drenched highlands of Africa to the cool, misty Isles of Britain, where a very different kind of creature, one associated not with solar majesty but with mystery and prophecy, was believed to hold the literal keys to a kingdom's fate. And so we arrive at the Tower of London, that formidable fortress on the banks of the Thames, where history whispers from the cold stone and where, for centuries, the fate of an entire kingdom has been superstitiously tethered to the welfare of a handful of large black birds. The legend is as simple as it is dire. Should the ravens ever depart the tower, the crown will fall and Great Britain will be plunged into catastrophe. It is a belief so potent that it has been institutionalized, leading to the unique and ancient post of the Raven Master, a yeoman warder whose sacred duty is not just to care for these birds, but to ensure they never, ever leave. This is not a casual tradition, it is a form of state-sponsored magic, a deliberate and continuous act of symbolic preservation. To guarantee their stay, the birds undergo a delicate procedure known as wing clipping, where the primary flight feathers on one wing are carefully trimmed. This doesn't hurt the bird, but it prevents them from achieving the sustained flight needed to cross the River Thames, effectively making the tower their permanent, if gilded, cage. The practice is said to date back to the reign of King Charles II in the 17th century. Legend holds that his royal astronomer, John Flamsteed, who had an observatory at the White Tower, complained that the ravens were interfering with his work and petitioned to have them removed. The king, however, was reportedly warned by a soothsayer or a courtier of the old prophecy. He immediately countermanded the order, decreeing that at least 6 ravens must always remain at the tower to safeguard the realm. From that moment, the birds were transformed from wild creatures into official wards of the state, their presence a non-negotiable condition for national security. But the ravens' role as interpreters of destiny extends far beyond simply being present. In earlier centuries, their daily behavior was minutely observed and analyzed by those who believed they could read the language of the gods in the actions of animals. The Raven Master of today continues this tradition of close observation, but in the past this duty fell to court astrologers and mystics. They would listen intently to the raven's calls. A certain type of caw at dawn might be interpreted as a warning of a naval defeat, while a particular pattern of clicks and knocks could be seen as an omen of a bountiful harvest. Their flight patterns within the confines of the tower walls were also scrutinized. If they gathered on the battlements facing east, might it signal trouble from the continent? If they seemed agitated around the White Tower, was it a premonition of a fire or an attempt on the monarch's life? Even their social interactions were decoded. A fight between 2 ravens could be seen as predicting political infighting or a rebellion among the nobility, while a pair nesting successfully was a powerful sign of dynastic stability and a secure succession. These birds became a living, feathered barometer for the nation's anxieties and hopes, their every gesture a potential headline from the spirit world. This role makes perfect sense when you consider the raven's deep roots in European mythology. In Celtic lore, the raven was associated with the battle goddess Morrigan, a shapeshifter who often took the form of the bird to oversee the battlefield and prophesy the outcomes of war. To see a raven was to know that the gods were watching. In the Norse tradition, the god Odin, the All-Father and the Seeker of Wisdom, had 2 ravens named Hugin and Munin, whose names mean thought and memory. These birds would fly across the world each day, gathering all the information they could see and hear, and return to perch on Odin's shoulders to whisper everything they had learned into his ears. They were his eyes and ears, his personal intelligence network and interpreters of global events. By embedding ravens within the heart of England's primary fortress, the monarchy was, in a sense, attempting to create its own Hugin and Munin. The ravens of the tower were to be the crown's collective memory and thought, their presence ensuring that the kingdom would always have the wisdom and foresight to survive. They were a direct physical link to these ancient, powerful myths, transforming the tower from just a prison and an armory into a place of active, living prophecy. Today, the ravens are one of London's most beloved tourist attractions, a charming quirk of British history. Yet, even now, their symbolic power occasionally flashes with its old intensity. During the Second World War, the tower was struck by bombs during the Blitz, and the raven population plummeted. Only a single raven, a resilient bird named Grip, was confirmed to have survived the bombings. For a superstitious public enduring the darkest days of the war, the near disappearance of the ravens felt like a terrifyingly literal fulfillment of the prophecy, a sign that the nation itself was teetering on the brink. The fact that one raven remained and that the kingdom ultimately endured only served to reinforce the legend's potency in the modern imagination. The ravens are more than just a ceremonial relic. They are a continuous, tangible thread connecting a 21st century constitutional monarchy to a time when the destiny of a nation was believed to be written in the flight of a bird. This profound belief that the heavens spoke through the actions of avians was not a uniquely British or Northern European phenomenon. To find a civilization that took this concept and built an entire system of governance upon it, we must turn our gaze to the 7 hills of ancient Rome, where the practice of reading the future in the flight of birds was not mere folklore, but the very foundation of state authority. This Roman system of reading the divine will in the flight of birds, known as augury, was one of the most sophisticated and bureaucratic methods of animal interpretation ever devised. It was not a matter of superstition for the common people, but a formal branch of state science, an essential component of the political and legal machinery that ran the Republic and later the Empire. Before the Senate could declare war, before a new consul could take office, before a public assembly could pass a law, the augurs had to be consulted to ensure the gods approved of the undertaking. These priests, drawn from the highest echelons of Roman society, would ascend to a specially designated, consecrated open space on a hill, known as a templum. They would not look at just any bird. The practice was incredibly precise. The sky itself was divided into a sacred grid, and the augur would carefully observe which sector of this celestial map a bird entered, the type of bird it was, its altitude, its speed, and the nature of its cries. An eagle, the bird of Jupiter, king of the gods, flying from left to right through a favorable quadrant of the sky, was the most powerful positive omen one could receive, a direct thumbs up from the chief deity himself. Vultures, often associated with Mars, the god of war, could signal impending conflict or victory, while owls, linked to Minerva, might indicate the need for wisdom and caution. Every chirp, every swoop, every change in direction was a syllable in a divine language that only the augurs were trained to fluently read. Perhaps the most famous and tangible example of this practice in action was the use of the sacred chickens on military campaign. Roman legions did not march to war without taking a coop of these special hens with them. On the morning of a potential battle, the Pilarius, the keeper of the chickens, would perform a crucial ritual. He would release the birds and throw them a special kind of cake or grain. The entire fate of the army could hinge on the chicken's appetite. If the birds leaped from their cage and ate so greedily that bits of food fell from their beaks and onto the ground, a phenomenon known as tripudium, it was an absolutely splendid omen. The soldiers would be filled with confidence, believing the gods were marching with them, and the general would give the order to engage. However, if the chickens refused to eat, turned away from the food, or worse, fluttered away in distress, it was a terrifying sign of divine disapproval. The most notorious story involving these chickens comes from the First Punic War. The Roman admiral Publius Claudius Pulcher, frustrated that the sacred chickens would not eat before a crucial naval battle against the Carthaginians, reportedly snatched them from their cage and threw them overboard into the sea, scoffing, "If they will not eat, then let them drink." He proceeded with the attack and suffered a catastrophic defeat, a loss that was seen by all of Rome not as a military failure, but as a direct and predictable punishment for his blasphemous disregard for the sacred interpreters. This event wasn't just a colorful anecdote, it was a stark lesson in the absolute authority that animal omens held over even the most powerful men in the state. The intellectual and political weight of augury cannot be overstated. The great orator and statesman Marcus Tullius Cicero, who himself served as an augur later in his life, wrote extensively about the practice in his work on divination. While he expressed some personal philosophical skepticism about whether the birds truly carried messages from the gods, he argued passionately for the system's vital importance to the stability of the Republic. He saw augury not just as religion, but as a brilliant political tool. It provided a public, seemingly objective method for making difficult state decisions, lending them an air of inevitability and divine sanction that mere human debate could never achieve. It could also serve as a crucial check on power. If a political rival was proposing a law you opposed, you could, as an augur, announce that you had witnessed unfavorable bird signs during the proceedings, a power known as obnunciatio. This would legally force a postponement of the vote, potentially derailing your opponent's entire agenda. This meant that animal behavior, or at least the reported observation of it, could directly veto the will of the Senate and the people. Disputed auguries were not minor theological squabbles. They were the source of major political crises, showing how deeply the interpretation of animal signs was woven into the very fabric of Roman law, governance, and the relentless struggle for power. This highly structured, almost legalistic approach to animal interpreters, where the flight path of a single bird could alter the course of legislation, stands in stark contrast to the more personal and symbolic relationships we find in other cultures, such as the grand collections of exotic beasts that kings amassed not for their omens, but for their sheer power to impress and intimidate. While the Romans were meticulously charting the flight of birds, other rulers were taking a more direct and grandiose approach to demonstrating their command over destiny. They built entire zoos of captive power. The royal menagerie was not a simple collection of interesting fauna. It was a living, breathing map of a king's ambition and a three-dimensional argument for his right to govern the world. Think of the Palace of Versailles under King Louis XIV of France. His menagerie was not hidden away. It was a central, celebrated feature of the palace grounds, a sprawling complex of enclosures designed by the same architects who built his glorious halls. Here, visitors could see creatures from every corner of the known world: striped tigers from India, elegant giraffes from Africa, fierce bears from the Americas, and flocks of exotic birds with impossible plumage. Each animal was a trophy, a tangible piece of a distant land now under the symbolic dominion of the French crown. They were not there for mere amusement. They were prisoners of power, their very presence proving that the Sun King's influence stretched to the farthest horizons. The health of this collection was a matter of intense political importance. A menagerie filled with thriving, breeding animals was seen as a direct reflection of a prosperous and fertile kingdom. The message was clear: under this monarch, all of nature, even its most wild and untamable elements, was fruitful and orderly. Conversely, if a prized lion fell ill or a rare animal died without producing offspring, it could be interpreted as a subtle but ominous crack in the king's divine mandate, a sign that his control over his own realm might be weakening. This practice of using exotic animals as political props was perfected even earlier at the Tower of London. Long before it became famous for its ravens, the tower housed a formidable menagerie established in the 13th century by King Henry III. He received a wedding gift that would become the foundation of this collection: 3 leopards or possibly lions from Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor. This was not a casual present between friends. It was a strategic diplomatic gesture, a symbolic acknowledgement of power between 2 Christian rulers. Henry placed these magnificent predators in the tower, and the collection quickly grew to include elephants, a polar bear that was allowed to fish in the Thames on a long leash, and even what was described as a dragon, though it was likely a large python or crocodile. The location was key. The tower was a fortress, the heart of royal authority in London. By keeping these dangerous, exotic creatures at the very center of his military and political power, the king was staging a continuous spectacle of dominance. When foreign ambassadors arrived, they were not just shown the crown jewels or the armory. they were given a tour of the beasts. The unspoken message was brutal and unambiguous. Look at what I can capture and contain. Look at the wonders and terrors that answer to my command. My power is as real and as formidable as these lions, and any nation that opposes me will be caged just as they are. The Menagerie was a form of psychological warfare, a zoo that spoke the language of intimidation and awe. The collection itself, in its totality, became a unique kind of interpreter. Its very composition told a story. A king who possessed an elephant from India, a tiger from Bengal, and a parrot from the New World was visually claiming a global empire. He was demonstrating that his merchants, his navies, and his influence could penetrate the most remote jungles and cross the most treacherous seas to bring back their most impressive inhabitants. The Menagerie was a microcosm of the world, and the king was the master of this miniature universe. Furthermore, the condition of the animals served as a silent, ongoing commentary on the state of the realm. A thin, listless animal could be a source of gossip and concern, a metaphor for a neglected province or a failing trade route. A robust, majestic lion, on the other hand, reinforced the image of a strong, virile, and unchallengeable monarch. In this way, the entire menagerie functioned as a complex omen. It didn't give specific prophecies like the Roman augur's birds, but its overall health and diversity provided a constant visual assessment of the king's political fortunes. A shrinking or ailing collection suggested a shrinking or ailing empire, while an expanding, vibrant one promised a dynasty on the rise. This concept of a collection as a barometer of destiny represents a fascinating shift from seeking signs from individual, often mythical, creatures to creating an entire ecosystem whose fate is symbiotically linked to the throne. This grand, almost industrial approach to animal symbolism, where power is demonstrated through scale and possession, stands in beautiful contrast to the intimate and deeply spiritual relationships we find in other traditions, where a single mythical creature offers not a display of power, but a gift of profound wisdom. While the white elephants of Siam were living symbols of divine favor, and the ravens of London were seen as living omens, the relationship between a king and his animal interpreter could be far more personal, transforming into a deep spiritual mentorship. This is beautifully captured in the story of the Simurgh, a creature of breathtaking majesty from Persian mythology. The Simurgh wasn't just a bird, it was a cosmic entity of immense age and wisdom, often described as so large its wingspan could blot out the sun, with feathers the color of burnished copper and a gaze that held the knowledge of all the ages. This benevolent being lived on the mythical Mount Kaf, a mountain that encircled the world, and from this vantage point, it observed the unfolding of human destiny, choosing to intervene only for those of royal blood who were worthy of its guidance. The Simurgh's very appearance, a magnificent fusion of a bird's body, a dog's head symbolizing loyalty and vigilance, and the claws of a lion representing courage and authority, made it a walking emblem of the very virtues a king was expected to possess. It was a living lesson in leadership, a divine advisor who appeared not to give simple yes or no omens, but to offer profound counsel on the nature of power itself. The most poignant example of this mentorship is the story of the infant Zal, a prince born with hair as white as snow, a condition his father, King Sam, saw as a monstrous omen. In a heartbreaking act, the king abandoned his own child on the slopes of the Alborz Mountains. It was there that the Simurgh discovered the crying infant, and rather than seeing a cursed creature, it saw potential. The great bird did not merely keep the baby alive, it raised Zal as its own in its celestial nest, teaching him the languages of all creatures, the secrets of the stars, and the ancient wisdom of the world. This was an education in cosmic statecraft. When Zal was eventually rediscovered by his repentant father and returned to the human world to become a great hero and king in his own right, the Simurgh did not simply say goodbye. As a final act of protection and a tangible symbol of their unbreakable bond, it gave him a single golden feather from its own wing. It instructed Zal that if he ever faced a crisis so great that his own hard-won wisdom failed him, he had only to burn the feather and the Simurgh would instantly come to his aid. This feather was more than a magical item. It was a direct hotline to destiny, a physical token of the divine counsel that underpinned his right to rule. This legacy of guidance was then passed down to the next generation, to Zal's son, the greatest of all Persian heroes, Rostam. In one of the epic's most dramatic episodes, Rostam's magnificent warhorse, Raksh, is grievously wounded by a lion while his master sleeps. Spears and arrows from a rival army trap Rostam, and with his steed dying, his own death seems certain. In this moment of ultimate peril, Zal remembers the feather. The moment it is cast into the fire, the Simurgh appears, darkening the sky with its wings, but it does not attack the army or fight Rostam's battles for him. Instead, it acts as a divine physician, imparting the knowledge of healing. It instructs Zal on how to treat Raksh's wounds, using herbs and mystical techniques to restore the horse to full strength. With Raksh healed, Rostam is able to break free and achieve victory. This intervention is crucial because it underscores the Simurgh's true role. It doesn't grant easy victories, it provides the tools, the knowledge, the healing, the strategic insight that allow the hero to fulfill his own destiny. It interprets the twist of fate not by changing it, but by empowering the king to overcome the obstacle himself. This concept of the Simurgh's feather as a talisman is deeply significant. For a Persian king listening to these epic poems recited in his court, the story was not just entertainment, it was a political and spiritual allegory. The feather represented the accumulated wisdom of the ancestors, the divine right to rule, and the moral clarity needed to lead justly. A king who ruled with the Simurgh's feather in his possession, metaphorically speaking, was a king who understood that true power was coupled with immense responsibility and a connection to a wisdom greater than himself. He was expected to be a healer of his people, a protector of the weak, and a student of the world, just as Zal had been. The Simurgh, therefore, represents the absolute pinnacle of the mythical interpreter. It wasn't a passive sign to be read like the flight of a bird, nor was it a captured symbol of power like a lion in a menagerie. It was an active, engaged, and profoundly wise participant in the art of kingship, a celestial mentor that shaped the very character of the rulers it chose to guide. This idea that the ultimate wisdom necessary for leadership could be obtained from a creature of the natural world, even a mythical one, finds a fascinating and more earthly echo in the misty lakes and rivers of the Celtic world, where a different kind of creature held the key to all-encompassing knowledge. In the lush, mystical landscape of Celtic lore, where rivers were seen as veins of the earth and ancient trees held deep magic, the pursuit of wisdom took a uniquely fluid form. The ultimate prize was not a crown or a sword, but a fish, the salmon of knowledge, known in Irish as the Bradon Fisa. This was no ordinary salmon. It lived in the pool of Lyn Faic on the River Boyne, but its legendary journey to omniscience began far upstream at the mythical well of Segais. This well was the source of all rivers in Irish mythology, and surrounding it stood 9 sacred hazel trees. These trees bore nuts of a profound crimson hue, nuts that contained all the knowledge of the arts and sciences. They would periodically drop into the well, where they were consumed by the salmon that lived in its depths. Each nut the salmon ate imbued it with more of the world's wisdom, until the creature became a living, swimming library of all that could be known. A powerful prophecy grew around this singular fish. Whoever tasted its flesh first would inherit this boundless knowledge, gaining the power to see the past, present, and future all at once. For any king or aspiring leader, this was the ultimate spiritual quarry. The ability to foresee consequences, to understand the hearts of allies and enemies, and to rule with absolute wisdom was the true power behind the throne, and it all resided within the shimmering scales of this one aquatic creature. The most famous tale of the salmon involves the bard and seer Finnegas, who had spent 7 long years camped by the river Boyne, tirelessly fishing for this legendary prize. He understood that possessing its knowledge would make him the most revered advisor in any kingdom, a voice of destiny itself. Finally, his perseverance was rewarded. He felt a mighty tug on his line and hauled in a magnificent silver-scaled salmon. Knowing the prophecy, he knew he must be the first to taste it. He carefully instructed his young apprentice, a boy named Fionn mac Cumhaill, to cook the fish over the fire, but under no circumstances to eat any of it. Fionn, diligent and obedient, began to roast the salmon. As it cooked, a blister rose on its skin. Without thinking, Fionn pressed his thumb onto the blister to push it down, burning his finger in the process. Instinctively, he put his scorched thumb into his mouth to soothe the pain. In that single, accidental gesture, the prophecy was fulfilled. It was not the wise master, but the untrained youth who first tasted the salmon of knowledge. The infinite wisdom of the world did not flood into Finnegas, but into Fionn. From that moment on, whenever Fionn needed answers to an impossible question or foresight into a coming danger, he had only to put his thumb to his teeth, and the truth would be revealed to him. This story is a masterclass in Celtic irony, the idea that destiny cannot always be caught by the one who seeks it most deliberately, but often finds its way to the one who is ready, even by accident. This myth was far more than a simple folktale for entertainment around a campfire. For the Gaelic kings and chieftains of Ireland, the story of the Bredon Fisa served as a powerful political and spiritual allegory. It reinforced the idea that the wisdom necessary for just and effective leadership was not a purely human invention. It was a force that existed in the natural world, a divine resource that could be accessed, often through a conduit in the animal kingdom. A king was not just a warrior or an administrator. He was expected to be a wise judge, a discerning strategist, and a custodian of his people's future. The salmon represented the ultimate source of this judicial and prophetic insight. While a king might not literally fish for the salmon, he would actively pursue its symbolic equivalent by sponsoring the class of people who were the keepers of this wisdom, the Filled or poet-seers. These bards were the human repositories of history, law, and genealogy. By paying them to recite the old stories, including the tale of Fionn and the salmon, the king was publicly aligning himself with the quest for transcendent knowledge. He was showing his tribe that his court was a place where such wisdom was valued, and that his own decisions were informed by this deep, ancestral connection to the land and its secrets. The salmon, therefore, became an animal interpreter of a different kind. It didn't live in a cage in the court like the Lion of Judah, nor did its daily behavior provide specific omens like the ravens of the tower. Instead, its very existence in the mythology served as a permanent reminder that the capacity for enlightened rulership was out there, waiting to be discovered by the worthy. This concept stands in beautiful contrast to the animal interpreters we've encountered in other traditions. Unlike the white elephant of Siam, whose physical presence was a direct and constant measure of a king's divine favor, the salmon of knowledge was an elusive, almost philosophical goal. Its power was not in its being seen, but in the pursuit of its essence. It contrasts sharply with the Roman practice of augury, which was a formal, state-sanctioned science for reading the will of the gods in bird flight. The Celtic approach was more personal, more mystical. It suggested that wisdom wasn't about correctly interpreting a random sign from a chicken, but about a fundamental, internal transformation. The way Fionn was permanently altered by a single taste. The salmon offered not a simple yes or no answer for a single decision, but a lifelong capacity for insight. This reflects a different relationship with destiny. In many of the other stories, animals are used to confirm a preordained path or to validate a king's inherent right to rule. The story of the Salmon, however, is about the acquisition of the right to rule through the attainment of wisdom itself. It suggests that the most legitimate king is not necessarily the one with the purest bloodline, but the one who possesses the deepest understanding, however he may come by it. This pursuit of animal-born enlightenment, where the key to destiny is consumed and internalized, provides a thoughtful counterpoint to the externalized, often intimidating, symbolism of creatures like the chained Barbary lions or the war elephants of Hannibal, where power was demonstrated through dominance and spectacle. This powerful idea of an animal representing the ultimate challenge to be conquered finds its classic expression not in a living court creature, but in a monster from the heart of Greek legend. The Nemean lion was no ordinary beast. According to the myth, it was a monstrous offspring of supernatural beings, its hide so tough that no weapon made by human hands could pierce it. It terrorized the region of Nemea, its invulnerability making it an unstoppable force of pure chaos, devouring livestock and people alike, rendering the land unsafe and ungovernable. When the hero Heracles was set the task of slaying this creature as the first of his famous 12 labors, he quickly discovered that conventional force was useless. His arrows bounced harmlessly off its hide, and his sword blade bent against its skin. This forced him to rely on his wits and his raw, physical strength, eventually wrestling the lion into submission and strangling it with his own hands. He then used the lion's own razor-sharp claws to skin it, donning its impenetrable pelt as his own iconic armor. This narrative arc is crucial. It's not just a story about killing a dangerous animal, it's a parable about intelligence and heroic virtue triumphing over seemingly insurmountable primal chaos. The lion was a symbol of everything that threatened civilization: disorder, fear, the untamed wild. Heracles, by defeating it, didn't just remove a pest. He enacted the very principle of order being imposed upon chaos, a foundational act for any society, and most importantly, for any ruler. This powerful metaphor was not lost on the ambitious kings who followed in the centuries after these myths were first told. Perhaps the most famous example is Alexander the Great, who consciously and deliberately modeled his public image on the hero Heracles. Alexander traced his lineage, both real and invented, back to the hero, and he saw his own conquests as a modern, grand-scale version of the Heraclean labors. Just as Heracles had journeyed to the ends of the known world to perform his tasks, Alexander marched his army to the very edges of the known map, to India and Egypt. In this context, the Nemean lion was not just a monster from a story. It became a symbol for every enemy Alexander faced, from the chaotic Persian Empire to the wild, unknown lands at the edge of the world. By portraying himself as a new Heracles, Alexander was making an extraordinary claim. He was asserting that his military campaigns were not mere acts of territorial expansion or personal ambition. They were a divinely sanctioned, heroic destiny to bring order and Greek civilization to a chaotic and barbaric world. His inevitable victory over his lions was preordained proof that he was not just a king, but a champion of destiny itself. This was political propaganda of the highest order, transforming a brutal military commander into a mythic figure fulfilling a cosmic role. The symbolism of the lion's impenetrable hide was particularly potent for these rulers. In a world of constant political intrigue, assassination attempts, and battlefield dangers, every king dreamed of invincibility. The Nemean lion's skin, which no weapon could pierce, represented the ultimate form of this protection. When Heracles wore it, he became untouchable by his enemies. When a king like Alexander associated himself with this image, he was projecting that same quality onto his own reign. He was suggesting that his rule was similarly unassailable, protected not just by armies, but by a divine favor that made him impervious to the schemes of his rivals and the weapons of his foes. His ability to defeat the lion, metaphorically through his conquests, was the demonstration of this divine sanction. It was a circular and brilliant piece of logic. His success proved he had the favor of the gods, and the favor of the gods guaranteed his success. The lion's defeat was the evidence, and the lion's pelt was the ongoing symbol of the power that evidence conferred. We can see this visual propaganda everywhere in the art of the Hellenistic period that followed Alexander's conquest. Coins minted by various successor kings frequently feature the ruler portrayed with the attributes of Heracles, often wearing the lion skin headdress. This was mass media in the ancient world. Every person who held one of those coins, from a merchant to a common soldier, would see the king's face fused with the symbol of the Nemean lion's conqueror. It was a constant, silent reminder of the king's heroic lineage and his invincible nature. Sculptures from the era take this even further, often depicting kings in the act of subduing a lion, their muscles straining as they overpower the beast. These were not scenes from mythology, they were allegorical portraits of the living ruler. The message was clear. Just as Heracles tamed the chaos of the wild, your king is here to tame the chaos threatening your world. He is the one chosen to interpret the challenges facing the people, be they foreign invasion, economic hardship, or social unrest, and to conquer them through his heroic Herculean strength. This use of mythical animal symbolism was a masterstroke, allowing kings to bypass complex political arguments and appeal directly to the deep-seated human love for heroic stories, thereby clothing raw political power in the majestic robes of predestined virtue and legend. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, an entirely different kind of dragon soared through the celestial currents of power. The Chinese dragon, or long, stands in stark contrast to the treasure-hoarding, maiden-snatching beasts of European folklore. This was no monster to be slain by a knight. It was a benevolent, celestial force, a being of profound wisdom and immense power that embodied the very principles of imperial authority and cosmic balance. Where Western dragons often represented chaos and evil to be conquered, the long was the ultimate symbol of order and harmony, its favor essential for the very functioning of the universe. It commanded the rains, the rivers, and the seas, dwelling not in damp caves but in the heavens themselves, moving through the clouds and mists. This control over water made it the linchpin of an agricultural society, for its benevolence meant timely rains and bountiful harvests, while its displeasure could manifest as devastating floods or parching droughts. The dragon was therefore inseparable from the concept of life itself, a divine manager of the natural world whose mood directly influenced the fate of millions. This celestial creature was inextricably linked to the person of the emperor, who held the title Son of Heaven. He was not considered a god in his own right, but the crucial intermediary between the heavenly realm and the earthly one. His primary duty was to maintain harmony between humanity and the cosmos, and the dragon was his sacred emblem, the visual proof of this divine connection. The emperor's mandate to rule, known as the Mandate of Heaven, was a conditional grant of power from the cosmic forces, and the dragon was the most visible sign of whether he still held it. Its image was not mere decoration, it was a continuous, silent proclamation of his legitimacy. The emperor sat on a dragon throne, wore dragon robes, and lived in palaces adorned with dragon motifs. Everywhere he looked and everywhere his subjects looked upon him, the dragon was there, reinforcing the idea that his authority was not just political but cosmological. He was the human anchor for the dragon's celestial power, and the empire's stability depended on their symbiotic relationship. This relationship was made concrete through an elaborate system of sumptuary laws that governed the use of the dragon image with meticulous precision. The five-clawed dragon, known as the Long, was exclusively and ruthlessly reserved for the emperor alone. For any other person, be it a prince, a duke, or a high-ranking official, to use this five-clawed symbol was not just a breach of etiquette, it was an act of high treason, a direct challenge to the emperor's unique divine right, punishable by death. Lower nobility might be permitted to use a four-clawed dragon, or mang, and officials further down the hierarchy might have a three-clawed creature, but the distinction was absolute and universally understood. This visual hierarchy created a language of power woven into the very fabric of society. When you saw a five-clawed dragon on a yellow banner, you were in the presence of the Son of Heaven himself. This strict control transformed the dragon from a simple mythological figure into a highly regulated instrument of state propaganda, its image a constant interpreter of the emperor's supreme and unchallengeable status. The dragon's role as an interpreter of destiny, however, went far beyond static images on silk and porcelain. The court was a hive of divinatory activity, with whole departments of astronomers, meteorologists, and feng shui masters dedicated to reading the signs of the cosmos. They were, in essence, listening for the dragon's voice. A comet streaking across the night sky was not just a celestial rock, it was a dragon in flight, its path and brilliance a message about the emperor's policies. Unusual cloud formations, particularly those that resembled a serpentine shape, were scrutinized as potential appearances of the long, carrying omens about the success of a military campaign or the health of the heir apparent. Even violent weather events were interpreted through this lens. A devastating typhoon might be read as the dragon's roar of displeasure, a sign that the emperor had lost his moral virtue or had made a grave error in judgment. A gentle, seasonable rain that nourished the crops, on the other hand, was the dragon's benevolent sigh of approval, a clear affirmation that the Son of Heaven was in harmony with the cosmos and his mandate was secure. The entire natural world became a text to be read, and the dragon was the author. This made the dragon the ultimate cosmic partner. It was not a pet to be commanded, nor a captive beast to be displayed like the lions in a menagerie. It was a powerful, independent force whose cooperation had to be earned through the emperor's own virtue, wisdom, and pious conduct. The emperor's rituals, his sacrifices at the Temple of Heaven, and his adherence to Confucian principles were all seen as ways to maintain this vital partnership. If the empire suffered from natural disasters, famine, or rebellion, it was not necessarily the dragon's fault. It was interpreted as a failure of the emperor to uphold his end of the cosmic bargain. The dragon was thus a perfect mechanism for justifying political change. A successful rebellion that overthrew a dynasty could be explained as the dragon withdrawing its mandate from a corrupt or incompetent ruler and bestowing it upon a more virtuous one. The dragon's favor was not a permanent possession of a bloodline, but a renewable contract based on performance. This concept provided a philosophical and spiritual framework for the rise and fall of dynasties throughout Chinese history, with the dragon serving as the silent, celestial arbiter of every emperor's destiny. This idea of a majestic, serpentine creature serving as a conduit for royal communication with a higher power finds a fascinating and profound parallel in the bloodletting rituals of the Maya kings, who summoned their own visionary serpents from the very essence of their being. While the Chinese emperor communed with his celestial dragon through the observation of weather and stars, the Maya king of Central America engaged in a far more visceral and personal form of communication. For the Maya, the doorway to the other world was not in the sky above, but in the blood within. In the deep, torch-lit gloom of a pyramid temple, a powerful ritual would unfold. The king, adorned in heavy jade regalia and an elaborate headdress, would prepare to pierce his own body, drawing blood from his tongue, his earlobes, or his genitals using stingray spines, obsidian blades, or ropes of thorns. This act of auto-sacrifice was not an act of masochism. It was a sacred duty, the ultimate price a ruler paid to feed the gods and maintain the cosmic order. The blood collected on bark paper would be burned in a ceremonial brazier. As the smoke and the scent of burning blood curled upwards, something miraculous would occur. The king, weakened by blood loss and perhaps aided by hallucinogenic substances, would slip into a profound trance state, and from the heart of this sacred smoke, a vision serpent would begin to materialize. This was no ordinary snake. It was a massive, undulating, spectral being, a conduit between the human realm and the world of the gods and ancestors. Its body, often depicted in intricate carvings as a writhing, serpentine path, served as a portal. And from its gaping jaws, the face of a specific god or the spirit of a revered ancestor would emerge, speaking directly to the ruler. The vision serpent was the telephone line to the divine, and the king's own blood was the price of the call. These serpents were the ultimate mythical interpreters because they delivered personalized, actionable divine counsel. They were not vague symbols of power like the European dragon or the Chinese long. They were specific messengers. A king might summon a vision serpent to ask for guidance on whether to go to war against a rival city-state. The serpent that appeared might have the head of the maize god emerging from its mouth, which could be interpreted as a promise of agricultural prosperity and sustenance for the army, a clear green light for the campaign. Alternatively, if the serpent bore the visage of a death god, it might be a stark warning of catastrophic losses, advising the king to seek a diplomatic solution instead. The message was not always about war. A king planning the construction of a new temple or a grand plaza might perform a bloodletting ritual to seek approval. If a serpent appeared with the face of a founding dynastic ancestor, it was a powerful sign that the project had the blessing of the lineage and would cement the king's legacy for generations. The serpent itself was the interpreter, the medium that translated the inscrutable will of the cosmos into a comprehensible image and message for the mortal ruler. The king's fitness to rule was therefore judged by his ability to successfully perform this ritual, to shed his blood, enter the trance, summon the serpent, and correctly understand the divine pronouncement. A king who could not achieve this connection was like a modern leader who has lost all communication with his intelligence agencies. He was ruling in the dark, cut off from the very source of his legitimacy. We have stunning historical evidence of this practice from the city of Tikal, one of the most powerful Maya kingdoms. A magnificent limestone lintel from Temple 4 depicts King Jasaw Chan Kayawil I, who ruled in the 7th century, seated in a magnificent palanquin after a major military victory. But the scene is not just a celebration of the battle itself. The accompanying hieroglyphic text describes that before this campaign, Jasaw Chan Kayawil performed a bloodletting ritual. He spilled his own blood to summon a vision serpent, from which emerged the spirit of a powerful, deified ancestor. This ancestral spirit, speaking through the serpent, gave his explicit sanction for the upcoming war. When Jasaw Chan Kayawil then led his armies to a resounding triumph over his arch-rivals from the city of Calakmul, it wasn't just a military achievement, it was the fulfillment of a divine prophecy. He had the victory carved in stone not merely to boast of his prowess, but to prove to his subjects and his enemies that his actions were directed by the gods themselves. The vision serpent's message had been validated by success on the battlefield, irrevocably cementing his power and demonstrating that his reign was aligned with the forces of destiny. This was political genius, using a spiritual experience to justify and legitimize earthly power in the most profound way imaginable. The transformation of this intense spiritual experience into a political tool is what makes the vision serpent so fascinating. The ritual was on one level a genuine act of profound personal piety and sacrifice. The king was willingly enduring immense pain and risking his health for the good of his people, proving his dedication. On another level, it was a brilliantly staged piece of political theater. The common people watching from the plaza below would not see the king's trance or the details of the vision. They would see the smoke rising, they would know their ruler was communing with the gods, and they would later hear the proclamation of the divine message he had received. This created an unassailable authority. How could a peasant or even a nobleman challenge a decision that came directly from a god who appeared from the jaws of a cosmic serpent? The vision serpent thus became the ultimate instrument of royal propaganda. It allowed the king to frame his most ambitious and potentially controversial projects, whether costly wars, enormous building programs, or harsh taxations, not as his own personal whims, but as the direct orders of the celestial realm. The animal form of the serpent was crucial here. In Maya cosmology, the snake was a creature of both the earth and the sky, a symbol of rebirth and renewal due to its ability to shed its skin. It was the perfect creature to bridge the gap between worlds, making the serpent the ideal medium, the perfect spiritual technology for delivering a celestial decree directly into the hands of the king. This deeply spiritual and introspective form of animal interpretation, where the creature is a hallucinated guide born of sacrifice, could not be more different from the brutal, public, and very real spectacles that were about to unfold in the sand-covered arenas of Rome. Now we turn from the spiritual visions of Maya kings to the brutal, grinding reality of ancient warfare, where a different kind of colossal creature was used to write destiny on a grand historical scale. The war elephants of the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca were flesh and blood, not mythical apparitions, but to the Roman legions who faced them, they might as well have been monsters from a nightmare. Imagine the scene at the Battle of the Trebia River in 218 BC. The Roman soldiers, confident in their disciplined formations, watched in disbelief as the Carthaginian line parted. Through the gaps emerged living mountains of muscle and rage, their gray hides like moving fortresses, their tusks tipped with deadly iron points. The very ground shook with their approach, a deep, rhythmic thunder that preceded the screaming of panicked horses and the splintering of Roman lines. These were not just animals, they were Hannibal's ultimate psychological weapon, creatures so far outside the Roman military experience that they seemed to be instruments of a hostile god. For the soldiers in the legions, the elephants were a physical manifestation of divine disfavor, a sign that the gods of Rome had turned their backs and that this cunning African general was blessed by some terrifying foreign power. Their success in early battles like Trebia and later at Cannae was not just a tactical victory. It was interpreted by many on both sides as a cosmic verdict, a clear omen that Hannibal's destiny was to bring the mighty republic to its knees. This perception was carefully cultivated and amplified by Roman historians in the generations that followed. The great historian Livy, writing long after the events, described the elephants with a palpable sense of awe and horror that had been passed down through the generations. He didn't just recount their military effectiveness, he painted them as near mythical beings. He wrote of their terrifying trumpets that sounded like nothing on earth, their immense size that dwarfed men and horses, and the sheer, unstoppable force of their charge that could flatten the most disciplined formation. In his narrative, the elephants are more than just war machines. They are agents of chaos, otherworldly forces that Hannibal had somehow harnessed from the edges of the known world. This was not neutral reporting. By attributing such supernatural qualities to the animals, Livy and others were helping to construct a powerful legend. They were explaining one of the most traumatic periods in Roman history by suggesting that they hadn't just been defeated by a brilliant general, but by a man who commanded monsters, a man whose very army seemed to be a product of destiny itself. This literary portrayal cemented the elephants' role as unwitting interpreters of military fortune, their presence on the battlefield a visible, terrifying barometer of which side the fates currently favored. For Hannibal himself, the elephants were a masterpiece of strategic calculation and political theater. He understood the power of spectacle. Sourcing these animals, likely the now extinct North African forest elephant, was a monumental logistical feat that in itself demonstrated his resources and reach. When he paraded them before his army or arrayed them for battle, he was sending a clear, multi-layered message. To his own multi-ethnic army of Libyans, Numidians, Iberians, and Celts, the elephants were a unifying symbol of immense power and a promise of victory, a living guarantee that their general possessed the means to crush the legendary Roman legions. To the Roman spies who undoubtedly watched his movements, and later to the Roman commanders facing him, the elephants were a declaration of his unstoppable nature. They signaled that he was not a typical enemy who played by the established rules of Mediterranean warfare. He was a force of nature, a world shaker whose ambition was as vast as the creatures he commanded. He was consciously crafting an image of a man guided by an inexorable destiny, and the elephants were the centerpiece of that image, their very existence a challenge to the idea that Rome's power was preordained. This carefully constructed narrative of an unstoppable, destiny-driven campaign, however, began to unravel in the most unforgiving of environments, the towering, snow-clad peaks of the Alps. Hannibal's decision to bring his elephants on this treacherous late-year crossing was an act of sheer, breathtaking audacity. The journey was a nightmare for man and beast alike. The narrow, icy paths crumbled under the weight of the elephants, sending some tumbling into the abyss. The animals, built for the heat of North Africa, suffered terribly in the bitter cold and struggled to find enough food on the barren slopes. The local mountain tribes, who had never seen such creatures, attacked with rocks and spears from the heights above, further panicking the already distressed giants. While historical accounts of the number lost vary, the attrition was severe. The loss of each elephant was more than a tactical blow. It was a profound psychological and symbolic wound. For the soldiers who had marched with these living talismans from the sunny plains of Spain, watching them die in the frozen wastes must have felt like watching their own good fortune die. The event was later interpreted with a clear vision of hindsight as a pivotal omen. The great Roman historian Polybius, though more measured than Livy, still frames the Alpine crossing as the moment Hannibal's pristine, destined victory began to tarnish. The elephants that had been the emblem of his invincibility were now a testament to the brutal costs of his ambition. Their loss signaled that the fates were no longer clearing a path for him, that his destiny to conquer Rome was now contested, and that the gods were perhaps imposing their own price for such hubris. The story of Hannibal's elephants ultimately demonstrates a powerful historical truth. The line between a real animal and a mythical symbol is often blurred by perception and propaganda. These creatures were genuine military assets, but their greater impact was on the human spirit. They became instruments of destiny, not because they possessed any magical power, but because an entire civilization chose to see them that way. They were a canvas upon which Romans and Carthaginians alike projected their deepest fears, their hopes, and their interpretations of the divine will. Their thunderous charge could break an army's formation, but the idea of them could break an army's will long before the first spear was thrown. In the end, the legend of the elephants outlived their military utility. Long after the last Carthaginian elephant fell at the final battle of Zama, the image of Hannibal and his pachyderms crossing the Alps endured as one of history's most potent symbols of audacious ambition and a destiny that was grasped for but ultimately slipped away. This use of a very real, yet utterly extraordinary, animal as a barometer of fate shows that the human desire to find meaning in the animal kingdom extends beyond sacred temples and royal menageries, right onto the bloody fields of battle where the fate of empires was decided. In the shadow of the Great Pyramids and along the life-giving banks of the Nile, the spiritual and political life of ancient Egypt revolved around rhythms far older than any dynasty: the annual flood, the cycle of the sun, and the life of a single, extraordinary bull. The Apis bull was not merely considered sacred. It was believed to be a living piece of the divine walking the earth, a physical vessel for the powerful creator god Ptah. This was not a vague spiritual association. It was a concrete theological fact for the Egyptians. When they looked upon the Apis bull, they truly believed they were gazing upon Ptah himself, making this animal the most direct and tangible connection a person could have with a god during its lifetime. The selection process for this living deity was not left to chance or human whim. It was a matter of precise, divinely ordained identification. Priests would scour the countryside for a bull calf that bore the exact, specific markings said to be the signature of the god. This bull had to be black with a distinctive white diamond-shaped blaze on its forehead, the image of a vulture on its back, a scarab mark under its tongue, and double hairs in its tail. Finding an animal that met all these criteria was a momentous event, a clear signal that the god had chosen to reveal himself anew to the kingdom. Once identified, the bull's life was one of unparalleled luxury and reverence. He was brought to his own special temple complex in Memphis, the ancient capital, a place known as the Apian. Here, he was not housed in a stable but in a palace fit for a god. He had his own courtyard, a pool for bathing, and was attended by a dedicated staff of priests who served his every need. His diet was lavish, consisting of the finest grains and foods, and he was adorned with precious jewels and gilded horns. The public was allowed to come and view him in his courtyard, and it was believed that simply laying eyes upon the Apis could bring blessings and good fortune. But this was not a passive existence. The bull's every action was a potential headline from the god Ptah. A team of priests skilled in the art of divination maintained a constant watch over the animal. If the bull chose to lie on one side versus the other, if it bellowed in a certain way, or even which direction it faced while eating, all of these behaviors were carefully recorded and interpreted as omens. A restless bull might be seen as a warning of social unrest or an impending invasion from the east. If it displayed particularly placid and content behavior, it was interpreted as a promise of a bountiful Nile flood and a prosperous harvest season. The bull became a living, breathing barometer for the entire nation's fortune, a four-legged oracle whose instincts were decoded as divine policy briefings for the pharaoh. The death of the Apis bull was a national event of the highest solemnity, marking a profound and anxious juncture in the life of the kingdom. Because the bull was a mortal god, its passing was not a tragedy but a necessary transition, though a deeply perilous one. The death was treated with the same protocol as that of a pharaoh. The bull's body was meticulously mummified in an incredibly elaborate process that could take many weeks, using the same precious resins and linens reserved for the royal family. It was then interred in a massive, labyrinthine underground necropolis at Saqqara known as the Serapeum, a place reserved solely for these divine creatures. The bull was placed in an enormous monolithic granite sarcophagus, each one weighing dozens of tons, a testament to the immense resources and reverence devoted to this cult. The entire country would enter a period of official mourning, but beneath the public grief ran a powerful undercurrent of anxiety. The god Ptah was now absent from the world. The divine conduit was broken. This created a spiritual vacuum, a time when the kingdom was seen as particularly vulnerable to chaos, poor harvests, and political instability. The pressure on the pharaoh and the priesthood was immense, for the entire nation held its breath, waiting for the god to make himself known once more. This interlude between the death of one Apis and the discovery of the next was a direct test of the pharaoh's legitimacy. A swift and successful discovery of the new bull calf was a public relations triumph. It was heralded as proof that the pharaoh remained in harmony with the gods, that his rule was still divinely sanctioned, and that order had been swiftly restored. The joyous procession bringing the new Apis to Memphis was a powerful piece of political theater, demonstrating the pharaoh's successful role as the great intermediary. He was the one who had facilitated the return of the god to the people. However, if the search dragged on for months or even years, it was a catastrophe for the ruling monarch. Whispers would begin to circulate. Had the pharaoh committed some unseen transgression? Had he lost the favor of Ptah? Was his reign no longer blessed? A prolonged vacancy in the Apis office could embolden rivals, stir up dissent among the nobility, and shake the confidence of the common people in their leader. The health of the state and the health of the bull were one and the same. A thriving Apis meant a thriving Egypt under a legitimate pharaoh. A dead Apis without a swift successor meant a kingdom adrift, its connection to the divine severed, and its ruler's authority hanging by a thread. This deep integration of a single animal species into the core of the state religion represents perhaps the most complete and sustained example of an animal acting as an interpreter of royal destiny. The Apis bull was not a symbol to be used occasionally, like the Roman augurs reading bird flight before a battle. It was a permanent, central institution. Its life cycle, from its miraculous discovery through its opulent life as a national oracle, to its grand mummification and the frantic search for its successor, was a continuous, unfolding narrative of divine favor. The pharaoh's power was not just symbolized by the bull, it was actively validated by it day after day, year after year. The bull's existence provided an unbroken line of celestial communication, a constant reassurance to the people that their king was indeed the beloved son of the gods, and that as long as the Apis lived in splendor, the universe was in balance and Egypt would endure. This system created a perfect feedback loop of power, where the pharaoh's success proved the bull's accuracy, and the bull's favorable behavior reinforced the pharaoh's right to rule, a seamless fusion of zoology and theology that secured the throne for generations. From the celestial heights of the Chinese dragon and the blood-borne visions of the Maya, we descend into the rich tapestry of medieval European and Byzantine symbolism, where a magnificent hybrid creature reigned supreme in the heraldic imagination. The Griffon, with the powerful, regal body of a lion and the keen, soaring head and wings of an eagle, was a masterpiece of symbolic fusion. This was not a creature to be found in any forest or menagerie, but its conceptual power was perhaps greater for its mythical nature. In the lore that filtered down from the ancient Greeks and Persians, the Griffon was consistently portrayed as a guardian of unimaginable treasures, often gold hidden in the remote, wind-swept mountains of the east. It was a creature of immense purity and ferocity, an enemy of evil that would attack any who sought to steal the sacred hoard it protected. This role as a divine sentinel made it the perfect emblem for kings who wished to present themselves as the ultimate protectors of their realm's most precious assets, not just the gold in the treasury, but the safety of their people, the integrity of their laws, and the very soul of the nation itself. Kings and emperors, particularly within the sprawling, intricate courts of the Byzantine Empire and the aspirational Holy Roman Empire, eagerly adopted the Griffon as a heraldic badge of their dual authority. The creature's composite nature was a brilliant piece of political messaging. The lion's body represented everything terrestrial: raw courage, martial strength, and undisputed dominion over the land. It was the foundation of royal power, the brute force necessary to command respect and maintain order. The eagle's head and wings, however, lifted that power to a higher plane. They symbolized wisdom, foresight, and a connection to the divine. The eagle could soar where the lion could not tread, seeing the big picture from a god-like perspective, understanding strategy, law, and the moral responsibilities of leadership. A king who used the Griffon as his symbol was making an extraordinary claim. He was asserting that his rule was not merely grounded in physical force, but was also guided by celestial wisdom. He was the land and the sky, the sword and the scepter, the warrior and the judge, all combined into one indivisible, God-given authority. This symbolism was made concrete and ever-present through its application on the very instruments of power. The Griffon was not a secret symbol for initiates. It was emblazoned for all to see. It appeared on imperial seals pressed into hot wax on official documents, authenticating every decree and treaty with the unspoken promise of the creature's protective vigilance. It was carved into the arms of royal thrones, so that when the king sat in judgment, he was literally backed by the virtues of the Griffon. It was woven into tapestries that hung in palace halls and painted on the shields of loyal knights. In an age of limited literacy, this visual language was paramount. For a visiting ambassador or a common subject, the sight of the Griffon on a banner or a coin was an immediate, wordless lesson in the nature of their ruler. It communicated that he was the guardian of their collective destiny, a leader possessed of both the courage to defend them and the wisdom to guide them toward a prosperous future. The kingdom itself was the treasure he was sworn to protect. This ideal was further reinforced by the allegorical texts and bestiaries that circulated among the educated elite. These illustrated volumes, describing both real and mythical animals, often portrayed the Griffon as the mortal enemy of the horse, which symbolized base, untamed passions, and most notably, of the evil and deceptive basilisk. In this cosmic struggle, the Griffon was always on the side of light and order. For a king, aligning himself with this symbol was a way of publicly dedicating his reign to a holy crusade against the darkness, whether that darkness was external enemies, internal corruption, or spiritual decay. It framed his governance not as a simple matter of administration, but as a heroic, almost messianic quest. By wrapping himself in the Griffon's imagery, the king was promising his people a golden age, a time of peace and righteousness that would naturally follow from his virtuous, Griffon-like rule. The creature, therefore, acted as a mythical interpreter not of specific omens, but of the king's own potential and promise. It set a lofty standard for his character, a constant, silent challenge to live up to the perfect fusion of strength and wisdom that the Griffon represented. It was a symbol of what a king could be, and in claiming it, he was asking his people to judge him by that impossibly high ideal. This grand, heraldic vision of leadership, so concerned with projecting an image of perfect, composite virtue, stands in poignant contrast to the simple, unadorned loyalty that kings often found not in mythical beasts, but in the faithful companions waiting patiently by their hearths. Yet even as kings surrounded themselves with the awe-inspiring symbols of griffons and dragons, they often sought a more personal, uncomplicated companionship, a bond that reminded them of their own humanity amidst the crushing weight of the crown. This is where the loyal hound enters the stage of history, not as a mythical beast or a living omen, but as a faithful friend whose simple devotion could, in its own way, become legendary. Beyond the grand menageries and the formalized rituals of augury, the relationship between a king and his favorite hunting dog was one of the most intimate connections a monarch could have with the animal world. These dogs were constant companions on the hunt, in the royal chambers, and sometimes even on the battlefield, their presence offering a rare glimpse of the person behind the royal title. Their legendary loyalty served a powerful political purpose, transforming the often distant, godlike figure of the king into a more relatable man capable of love and fidelity. If a king could inspire such unwavering devotion in a creature known for its honest instincts, it suggested he possessed a fundamental goodness that his human subjects could trust. The hound's famed ability to sense danger and its fierce protectiveness were qualities metaphorically extended to the king himself, implying he possessed an almost animal-like instinct for sniffing out treachery among his courtiers and a primal drive to guard his people from harm. We see this beautifully illustrated in the Celtic myths surrounding King Arthur. While the tales of the Round Table and the sword Excalibur are known to all, fewer remember the name of Arthur's faithful hound Cavall. In the rich tapestry of Welsh mythology, particularly in the great prose collection known as the Mabinogion, there is a thrilling, chaotic tale called Culhwch and Olwen. Within this story, Arthur and his warriors embark on a seemingly impossible quest to hunt the monstrous boar, Twrchtr, a creature of immense destructive power. Arthur brings his favorite dog, Cavall, to aid in the hunt. The pursuit is epic and devastating, raging across the countryside. At one pivotal moment during a frantic chase, Cavall is said to have leaped with such force that his paw left a permanent impression in a stone. This was no ordinary footprint. It became a legendary landmark, a place known as Carn Cavall, which later travelers and storytellers would point to as physical proof of the dog's role in the great Arthurian saga. This small, tangible detail does something profound. It grounds the high fantasy of Arthur's court in the real, physical world. It suggests that even the most legendary of kings was accompanied not just by magical swords and wizards, but by a simple, loyal dog whose presence was significant enough to be etched into the very bedrock of the land's folklore. Cavall's story adds a layer of earthy, relatable virtue to Arthur's kingship, connecting him to the natural world in a way that his royal title alone never could. This theme of a dog's loyalty earning a king's eternal gratitude finds an even more dramatic expression in the story of Alexander the Great and his dog, Peritas. While historians debate the absolute historical truth of the anecdote, the fact that it was recorded and repeated by ancient biographers like Plutarch shows its powerful symbolic value. The story goes that during a fierce battle in what is now Central Asia, Alexander found himself in mortal peril, perhaps surrounded by enemy soldiers or facing a war elephant. At this critical moment, his beloved dog, a massive Molossian hound, leaped to his defense. Peritas fought with such ferocity that he distracted the attackers, giving Alexander the precious seconds he needed to recover and win the day. Tragically, the loyal hound was mortally wounded in the process. To honor this ultimate sacrifice, Alexander, in a gesture of profound personal grief and gratitude, did something extraordinary. He founded a city on the spot where the dog had died and named it Peritas after his fallen companion. Imagine the power of that act. Across his vast empire, Alexander founded many cities, most famously Alexandria in Egypt, naming them after himself as monuments to his own glory. But here was a city named not for a god, a general, or a victory, but for a dog. This story, whether entirely factual or not, served a crucial purpose. It showcased a side of Alexander that was not just the brilliant, ruthless conqueror, but a man capable of deep, personal attachment and immense gratitude. It suggested that the bond between the king and his canine friend was so strong it could literally reshape the map, turning a moment of personal loss into a permanent feature of the empire's geography. It was a powerful piece of propaganda that humanized the superhuman Alexander. These stories of Cavall and Peritas, one from myth and one from semi-history, reveal a common thread in the way kings used their canine companions to craft their public image. A hound loyalty was considered pure and incorruptible, a stark contrast to the fickle allegiances of human courtiers. By prominently featuring a loyal dog in their personal narrative, kings were indirectly making a statement about their own character. They were implying that they were the kind of master who inspired such selfless devotion, and therefore they must be worthy of the loyalty of their human subjects as well. The dog's keen senses, its ability to hear what humans cannot, to smell danger from afar, to sense the intentions of a stranger, were all qualities a wise king would wish to embody. The hound became a living metaphor for the king's own perceived ability to protect his realm, to be vigilant against plots, and to remain faithful to his duties. This personal bond added a crucial layer of relatable virtue, softening the edges of absolute power and suggesting that the monarch, in his private moments, was not so different from any other man who loved his dog. This intimate, almost domestic relationship between a ruler and his animal guide stands in quiet contrast to the vast, impersonal, and spiritually charged connections we find in the shamanic traditions of the northern Eurasian steppes, where a ruler's destiny was linked not to a single beloved pet, but to a wild, ancestral spirit animal that represented the very soul of his people. But to truly understand the worldview of the steppe khans, we must first step out of the stone palaces and temples of settled civilizations and onto the endless, wind-swept grasslands. Here, life was not about controlling nature from within walled cities, but about moving in harmony with its immense, unpredictable rhythms. Survival depended on reading the signs of the land, the movement of game, the condition of the pastures, the patterns of the stars, and the behavior of animals. In this vast, animistic universe, every mountain, river, and forest had its own spirit, and the creatures that roamed the land were seen as powerful, independent beings, each possessing a unique essence and wisdom. It was from this intimate, daily dialogue with the natural world that the concept of the spirit animal, or ongon, emerged. For a Khan, his spirit animal was not a symbol chosen from a book. It was a fundamental part of his identity, a protective guardian, and a source of intuitive power that connected him directly to the primal forces governing the steppe. This relationship was the bedrock of his authority, a deep, personal mystique that set him apart from other warriors and justified his command over the fierce, independent tribes. The most powerful and enduring of these spirit animal legends is undoubtedly the story of the blue-gray wolf, the celestial ancestor of Genghis Khan. The Secret History of the Mongols, the oldest surviving Mongolian literary work, begins not with a dry list of kings, but with this profound creation myth. It tells of a blue-gray wolf born with a destiny from heaven and his mate, a beautiful fallow doe. Together, they journeyed from the sacred waters of Lake Baikal, crossing the great inland sea until they reached the source of the Onon River, the very heartland of what would become the Mongol Empire. There they settled and gave birth to the lineage of the Borjigin clan, the family of Genghis Khan. This was not a quaint folk tale, it was a political and spiritual masterstroke. By claiming descent from this wolf, Genghis Khan was anchoring his right to rule in something far more ancient and respected than mere human nobility. He was declaring that his bloodline was literally born from the wild, untamable spirit of the steppe itself. The wolf was the perfect archetype, a creature of supreme intelligence, a master strategist who hunted in coordinated packs, fiercely loyal to its own and utterly ruthless to its enemies. These were the exact qualities Genghis Khan needed to unite the fractious Mongol tribes. The legend provided a divine mandate, suggesting that his rise was not an accident of history, but the fulfillment of a celestial prophecy written in the stars and embodied by the most respected predator on the plateau. This spiritual connection was not a passive inheritance. It was an active, living dialogue maintained through the crucial figure of the shaman. These spiritual intermediaries, who could enter trance states and travel between the worlds of the seen and unseen, served as the Khan's chief intelligence officers and strategic advisors. Their primary role was to interpret the will of the supreme sky god, Tengri, and the messages sent through the spirit animals. A Khan would not simply decide to move his vast ordu or mobile capital on a whim. He would consult his shamans, who would then seek a sign, They might meditate on a dream the Khan had, searching for the appearance of a wolf, an eagle, or a stag. They would scrutinize the natural world for omens, the flight path of a specific bird of prey, the behavior of a wolf pack seen on the horizon, or the entrails of a sacrificed sheep. If the shamans interpreted these signs as a message from the Khan's spirit animal, guiding them toward richer pastures or warning of an ambush in a certain valley, their counsel carried the weight of divine law. This system created a form of government that was both deeply spiritual and intensely practical. A decision to forge an alliance with a rival tribe or to launch a military campaign was not just a tactical calculation. It was a spiritual one, validated by the perceived approval of the animal world. The Khan's authority was thus a fusion of his own personal charisma and the supernatural credibility granted to him by the shamans who spoke for his spirit guide. This decentralized, animistic system of interpreting destiny stands in the sharpest possible contrast to the formalized rituals of the classical world we explored earlier. Consider the Roman augur standing in his sacred templum, using a bronze staff called a litus to divide the sky into a precise, man-made grid. His reading of bird flight was a highly structured, state-sanctioned science, bound by rigid rules and performed by an official priestly class within an established urban hierarchy. It was a top-down, bureaucratic approach to divinity. For the steppe Khan, the process was the complete opposite. His connection to his spirit animal was raw, personal, and decentralized. There was no permanent temple, no written manual, and no fixed hierarchy of priests beyond the personal shaman he trusted. The templum was the entire natural world, the open sky, the whispering grass, the trackless forest. The omens were not found in a predetermined sector of the sky, but in the unpredictable, living behavior of wild creatures. This was a bottom-up, emergent form of spirituality where divinity was immanent in every rock and creature, and leadership was validated by a personal, ongoing relationship with that power. Where the Roman system sought to impose human order upon the divine through complex ritual, the steppe system sought to humbly interpret a divine order that was already present in the wild. The legacy of this spirit-animal guidance did not fade with the passing of the great Khans. It became woven into the cultural DNA of the steppe peoples, influencing their art, their symbols, and their very identity. The wolf, in particular, remained a potent emblem long after the Mongol Empire fractured. The Turkic peoples also held the wolf in high esteem, with legends telling of an Asina wolf that rescued a young boy from his enemies and went on to mother the line of the Ashina clan, the founding dynasty of the Göktürk Khaganate. You can see this reverence etched into the artifacts they left behind, on gold plaques, weapon hilts, and ceremonial headdresses, where the stylized forms of wolves, eagles, and stags leap and soar. These were not just decorative motifs, they were declarations of power and a continuous invocation of the protective, guiding spirit of the ancestor. This belief system created a resilient and adaptable form of leadership, perfectly suited to the nomadic way of life. It provided a framework for making immense decisions under conditions of extreme uncertainty, offering a source of courage and conviction that allowed a Khan to lead his people across thousands of miles of unknown territory, trusting that the spirit of the blue-gray wolf was running ahead of him, scouting the path to a destiny written not in books, but in the wind and the stars. Now let us journey to the sun-scorched courtyards of the Moroccan sultans, where the air itself seemed to tremble with a different kind of power, not the subtle whisper of a spiritual omen, but the palpable, throaty roar of a chained king. Here, in the imperial cities of Menageries and Fez, the Barbary lion, a magnificent and now tragically extinct subspecies known for its immense size and dark, flowing mane, was not merely displayed but strategically deployed as a living argument for absolute authority. Unlike the white elephants of Siam, which were venerated as divine gifts, or the ravens of the tower, which were protected as national talismans. The Barbary lions of the sultans were prisoners of prestige. Their captivity was the entire point, kept on heavy chains in the central courtyards of the palace. These apex predators were a continuous, roaring reminder of the sultan's ability to dominate the most formidable forces in his kingdom, both animal and human. The chain that tethered the lion was a powerful piece of political theater. It did not signify that the lion was weak. It screamed that the sultan was strong enough to restrain such raw power, to bring the untamable to heel and keep it there, a permanent testament to his unchallengeable will. This practice reached its zenith during the reign of the Alauite sultans, who transformed the lion into a central pillar of their diplomatic language. When a foreign ambassador from a European power or a rival Ottoman pasha was granted an audience, the meeting was often staged with deliberate drama. The envoy would be led through labyrinthine palace corridors, past guards standing rigidly at attention, and into a grand courtyard where, in a shaded alcove or a specially built enclosure, the lions would be present. The message was immediate, visceral, and required no translation. As the diplomat attempted to negotiate a trade agreement or a political alliance, the low growl of a lion or the sharp clink of its chain would punctuate the conversation. This was psychological warfare conducted with living props. The sultan, seated calmly in the presence of such contained fury, was demonstrating that his authority was as natural and as fearsome as the lion's nature. To defy him was to step into the cage. The lion became a silent participant in every negotiation, its latent power amplifying the sultan's words and making any thought of betrayal or disrespect seem tantamount to suicide. This was not subtle symbolism. It was a blunt instrument of statecraft designed to unnerve and intimidate, ensuring that visitors left the palace with a renewed and perhaps terrified respect for the man on the throne. Beyond this theater of intimidation, the lions served a more nuanced role as living barometers of the sultan's fortune. The court, a hive of gossip and political intrigue, paid close attention to the condition of these royal beasts. Their health was not a matter of animal welfare, but of state security. A lion with a glossy coat, a bright, alert gaze, and a powerful, frequent roar was seen as a direct reflection of the sultan's own vitality and the robustness of his rule. It signaled that the kingdom was strong, its leadership vigorous, and its future secure. Conversely, a listless lion, one that refused to eat or whose roar became weak and infrequent, could send ripples of anxiety through the palace. Courtiers would whisper, interpreting the animal's poor condition as a bad omen. Was the sultan himself ill? Was his grip on power weakening? Was some internal rebellion or external threat sapping the strength of the state? The lion's body became a text to be read for signs of political decay, a fuzzy, four-legged canary in the coal mine of the monarchy. This transformed the creature from a simple symbol into a captive oracle. Its instincts and its physical state were constantly monitored, not for their own sake, but for what they might reveal about the invisible currents of power and destiny flowing around the throne. The line between a living emblem and a living omen was profoundly blurred. The specific choice of the Barbary lion was also deeply significant. This was not just any lion. It was a native son of the Atlas Mountains and the North African coast, a creature woven into the very landscape and folklore of the region. By capturing and displaying this local titan, the Sultan was making a powerful statement about his dominion over the entire Moroccan ecosystem. He was demonstrating that even the king of the local beasts answered to him. This act resonated with the populace, for whom the lion was already a symbol of courage and nobility. The Sultan, by association, absorbed these qualities. His ability to master the creature proved he was the true apex predator, the ultimate alpha in a land that respected raw strength. Yet this mastery came with a cruel irony. The very act of chaining and displaying the Barbary lion, of making it a spectacle of power, ultimately contributed to its demise. Removed from the wild breeding pool and kept in often poor conditions, their numbers dwindled. The last wild Barbary lion was killed in the 1940s, and the majestic creature that once roared in the courtyards of Fez is now gone forever, a silent testament to the heavy price of being a living symbol of absolute power. The Sultan's practice represents the most direct and unadorned form of animal interpretation we have encountered, one that relied not on complex mythological frameworks or priestly divination, but on the simple, terrifying, and undeniable presence of a predator whose captivity was the most eloquent argument for the man who held its chain. And so we come to one of history's most delicious ironies, a story where the heroes were not majestic lions or wise eagles, but a flock of decidedly common and decidedly noisy geese. The year was 390 BC, and a fearsome Gallic army, led by the chieftain Brennus, had already crushed a Roman force at the Battle of the Allia and was now marching on Rome itself. The city was thrown into a state of panic. Most of the surviving soldiers and civilians fled to the nearby city of Veii, but a small, desperate garrison barricaded itself inside the ancient and heavily fortified citadel on the Capitoline Hill. This steep, rocky outcrop was the spiritual and political heart of Rome, home to the most sacred temples, including the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus and the more modest shrine to the goddess Juno, where her sacred geese were kept. The Gauls, finding the main city largely abandoned, laid siege to the Capitoline. For months, they tried and failed to storm its formidable defenses. They eventually settled into a grinding blockade, hoping to starve the defenders into submission. The situation inside the citadel grew dire. Food and water were rationed, and the Roman soldiers, exhausted and hungry, maintained a weary watch. According to the great Roman historian Livy, the Gauls, during a quiet, moonless night, hatched a daring plan. A small, elite group of warriors began to scale the cliff face of the Capitoline, a route so steep and treacherous the Romans had deemed it unassailable and left it unguarded. In the dead of night, not a single Roman sentry heard the faint scuffles of the climbing men. The city's fate hung by a thread, but the guardians of the capital were not the human soldiers. They were Juno's geese. The birds, kept sacred and well-fed even during the famine, were disturbed by the strange sounds and movements below. Their natural instinct for alarm triggered a raucous, frantic cackling and a furious flapping of wings. This sudden, shocking cacophony ripped through the silent night, jolting the former consul Marcus Manlius from his sleep. He seized his weapons, rushed to the edge of the cliff, and just in time saw the shadowy form of a Gallic warrior cresting the summit. With a mighty shove, Manlius sent the first invader tumbling down the rock face, crashing into the climbers below and raising the alarm throughout the garrison. The Romans rallied, repelling the attack and saving the capital, and with it the very idea of Rome from utter destruction. The aftermath of this single night transformed the geese from simple temple animals into national celebrities and divine instruments. The Roman Senate, in a formal act of gratitude, decreed that the geese were to be honored as the saviors of the city. From that day forward, they were maintained at public expense, treated with a reverence usually reserved for the symbols of the state itself. Their vigilant cackling was no longer just the noise of barnyard fowl. It was officially recognized as a direct warning from the gods, a divine alarm system. The Romans believed that the goddess Juno, through her sacred animals, had personally intervened to protect her temple and her city. This was a powerful theological and political message. It demonstrated that the gods cared for Rome, and that they would use even the most humble of creatures to communicate their will and ensure its survival. The event was commemorated annually in a peculiar ceremony. Each year, a dog was ritually crucified on a cross of elder wood, while a goose was carried in a litter, bedecked with rich ornaments and celebrated like a conquering general. This stark contrast in treatment was a brutal public reminder of the failure of the watchdogs, who had slept through the attack, and the glorious success of the geese. The ritual reinforced the lesson for generations. Vigilance, even in the most unexpected forms, was sacred, and negligence was a crime against the state, punishable by a shameful death. For centuries after this pivotal event, the behavior of the temple geese was not taken for granted. They became a permanent, living feature of Rome's state security apparatus. The priests of Juno and likely other officials were tasked with observing the flock closely. Their sounds were meticulously analyzed. Was a sudden outburst of cackling just a squabble over food, or was it a genuine warning of an unseen threat? Did their agitation at a certain time of day correlate with troubling news from a distant province? The geese had proven their worth in the most dramatic way possible, and the Romans, a deeply pragmatic and superstitious people, were not about to ignore their potential as ongoing oracles. Their presence on the Capitol served as a continuous, feathered reminder of that one night when the destiny of a civilization was decided not by a legion, but by a flock of startled birds. This practice shows how a single, pivotal historical moment could instantly mythologize an entire animal species, elevating them from the mundane to the miraculous and embedding them into the very fabric of the nation's identity and its system of interpreting danger. The story of the Capitoline geese stands apart from the other animal interpreters we have explored in a fascinating way. Unlike the white elephant of Siam or the Apis bull of Egypt, the geese were not inherently rare or majestic. They were common farm animals. Their power was not inherent in their species, but was bestowed upon them entirely by context, by their location in a sacred space at a critical moment in time. They were not chosen for their symbolic qualities, but became symbols through pure, unadulterated action. This democratization of animal prophecy is profoundly revealing. It suggests that in the Roman worldview, the gods could and would use any available tool to communicate, that divine messages were not the exclusive domain of exotic beasts or priestly rituals, but could come screeching from the most ordinary of sources. The geese were not kept in a menagerie to display imperial power over nature like the lions of the sultans. They were not mythical guides like the Simurgh. They were functional, feathered watchmen, their value derived entirely from a practical service rendered in a moment of existential crisis. Their legend endures as a powerful testament to the idea that destiny can sometimes have a very loud and very unexpected voice. This concept of animals as communal guardians, whose very nature serves to warn and protect, now leads our imagination away from the historical citadels of Rome and toward the misty realms of legend, where the creatures themselves are woven from the very fabric of fantasy. In the soaring cathedrals and illuminated manuscripts of medieval Europe, a very different kind of creature captured the royal imagination, one whose power lay not in its physical strength but in its impossible purity. The unicorn emerged from a blend of ancient natural histories, like those of the Roman scholar Pliny the Elder, and burgeoning Christian symbolism to become the ultimate emblem of grace and sanctity. This was not a beast to be chained in a courtyard like a lion, but a spiritual ideal to be pursued. Its single, spiraling horn, known as the alicorn, was said to possess the miraculous ability to detect and neutralize poisons, a terrifyingly real threat in the treacherous world of medieval politics. A king who aligned himself with the unicorn was therefore making a profound claim about his own nature. He was presenting himself as a moral antidote to the corruption of the world, a ruler whose very presence could purify a corrupt court and heal a sick kingdom, his authority acting as a divine filter against the venom of treason and sin. This symbolism was masterfully woven into the very fabric of courtly life through breathtaking works of art commissioned by the highest echelons of nobility. The most famous of these, the series of tapestries known as the Hunt of the Unicorn, created for the powerful La Rochefoucauld family in the late 15th century, is far more than a simple depiction of a chase. It is a dense, layered allegory. The sequence shows hunters and hounds pursuing the magnificent white beast through an enchanted forest, eventually cornering it where it is slain and then miraculously restored to life, resurrected in an enclosed garden tied to a pomegranate tree. For a medieval viewer, every element of this story resonated with spiritual meaning. The unicorn itself was widely interpreted as a symbol of Christ, a pure, singular being who is captured and killed, only to triumph over death. The enclosed garden, or hortus conclusus, represented the Virgin Mary, and the act of taming the unicorn within it signified the incarnation. But for the dukes and kings who hung these tapestries in their great halls, the allegory had a powerful political dimension. The virtuous monarch was the hunter, and his righteous reign was the pursuit that could capture and harness this divine purity for the benefit of his people. His kingdom was the enclosed garden, a space of order and sanctity that he alone could create and protect. While no monarch ever presented a living unicorn at his coronation, the creature's image was weaponized through its pervasive use in heraldry and royal regalia. Coats of arms, the fundamental branding of noble families across Europe, frequently featured the unicorn as a supporter, most famously in the royal coat of arms of the United Kingdom, where the Scottish unicorn stands chained opposite the English lion. This was not a casual choice. The chain, often depicted delicately linking a golden crown around the unicorn's neck, was a crucial detail. It did not signify the animal's subjugation, but rather the idea that its wild, untamable power had been willingly harnessed by the crown for the good of the realm. The unicorn's fierce independence was legendary. It could only be captured by a pure virgin, so a king who could claim this creature as his emblem was implicitly declaring that his own virtue was so absolute that he could command such a celestial force. His rule was therefore not merely a political arrangement, but a sacred partnership with the divine, a destined role as the guardian of moral order. This visual propaganda was a constant, silent sermon on the king's God-given right to rule, reminding all who saw his seal, his banners, or his palace decorations that his authority was rooted in a purity that was as rare and powerful as the unicorn itself. This relentless pursuit of symbolic purity through the unicorn stood in the most dramatic contrast imaginable to the gritty, violent, and deafeningly loud world of the Byzantine hippodrome. While European kings dreamed of enchanted forests and mystical hunts, the Byzantine emperors in Constantinople confronted their destiny in a massive stadium filled with the roar of 100,000 citizens. The chariot races held in the hippodrome were not mere entertainment. They were the volatile heart of the city's political life. The competing factions, most famously the Blues and the Greens, were far more than sports teams. They were vast, highly organized corporations with their own militias, political agendas, and deep ties to different theological and social factions within the empire. An emperor's popularity, and indeed his very grip on power, could hinge on the performance of the charioteers and horses he supported. The horses themselves, magnificent animals bred for speed and endurance, became unwitting avatars of political fortune. A victory for the Green faction's team was not just a win for the Greens. It was a public, undeniable sign of divine favor for their entire political platform, and a severe blow to an emperor who backed the Blues. The behavior of the horses in the starting gates, their performance on the track, and the final outcome of the race were all minutely observed and instantly interpreted as omens for the health of the empire and the legitimacy of the man on the throne. This system created a form of government where animal interpreters were not solitary, revered creatures like the Apis bull, but were part of a frenzied public spectacle. The emperor was not a remote figure seeking wisdom through quiet contemplation of a mythical ideal. He was a performer on a very dangerous stage, forced to manage the violent passions of the mob. Control of the hippodrome factions was as crucial to his survival as control of the army. Emperors like Justinian I and his formidable wife, Theodora, understood this all too well. The devastating Nika riots of 532 AD, which nearly toppled Justinian's reign, began as a conflict between the Blues and the Greens in the Hippodrome and escalated into a city-wide insurrection that saw tens of thousands killed. The chariot teams and their horses were the spark that could ignite a political inferno. In this world, destiny was not interpreted through the serene capture of a unicorn in a tapestry, but through the dust, the sweat, the thundering hooves, and the fickle cheers of the crowd. It was a brutal, practical, and deeply cynical form of animal interpretation, where the omens were directly tied to the volatile will of the people and the ruthless calculations of power, showing two entirely different paths a king could walk, one paved with ideals of sacred purity, the other with the harsh cobblestones of realpolitik and the ever-present threat of the mob. To understand the sheer explosive power of the hippodrome, you have to picture it not as a sports stadium, but as the beating, chaotic heart of a 1,000-year empire. Imagine a vast, oval-shaped arena, larger than any Roman circus that came before it, capable of seating over 100,000 souls. In the center, a towering spire adorned with ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, the obelisk of Theodosius, looked down upon the track. At one end sat the emperor in his lavish kathisma, a private box connected directly to the great palace. From this vantage point, he was not a distant ruler observing a game. He was the central actor in a high-stakes political drama where the main characters were four chariot racing factions known by their colors: the blues, the greens, the reds, and the whites. While the reds and whites gradually faded in importance, the blues and the greens evolved into something far beyond fan clubs. They were massive, highly organized corporations, complete with their own funding, militias, and sprawling networks of supporters in every neighborhood and social class. A person's affiliation with the blues or greens could define their trade, their religious beliefs, and even their political loyalties. The factions became the de facto voices of the people, and the hippodrome was their parliament, a place where the chants of the crowd could shake the very foundations of the throne. The horses and charioteers who competed in this arena were therefore not merely athletes, they were gladiators in a symbolic war for the soul of the empire. A victory for the Green faction's team was never just a sporting achievement. It was a public, thundering endorsement of the entire political and theological platform associated with the Greens. If the Greens were currently opposing a new tax or championing a particular interpretation of Christian doctrine, their win on the track was instantly interpreted as a sign of divine favor for those very policies. Conversely, for an emperor who openly supported the blues, a Green victory was a humiliating and very public blow. It was seen as a clear omen that the gods and the people were turning against him. The horses themselves, magnificent animals bred from the finest stock, became these unwitting avatars of political destiny. Their performance was scrutinized with an intensity that far surpassed mere sporting interest. If the emperor's favored horse stumbled out of the gate, it was not bad luck. It was a portent of instability in his reign. If a horse from the opposing faction demonstrated unexpected endurance, it was a sign of that faction's rising power and resilience. The charioteers, often slaves or men from humble origins who could become incredibly wealthy and famous, were the proxies through which these cosmic and political battles were fought. Their skill and bravery were legendary, but their success or failure carried consequences that echoed far beyond the winner's circle, directly influencing policy debates, military appointments, and the perceived legitimacy of the emperor himself. No one understood this volatile relationship between the hippodrome and power better than the Emperor Justinian I and his formidable wife, Theodora. Early in their reign, they faced the ultimate test of this system, an event that illustrates just how tightly the fate of the empire was woven into the fabric of the chariot races. In January of the year 532, a seemingly minor dispute erupted during the races. It began with the fans of the blues and greens who were often at each other's throats, but on this day they did something unprecedented. They united. Chanting in unison, they directed their fury at Justinian, demanding the pardon of two condemned men, one from each faction. The emperor refused. The chants turned to riots. The mob spilled out of the hippodrome, and for 5 days the city of Constantinople was consumed by an inferno of rebellion. This was the Nika Revolt, named for the crowd's rallying cry of Nika, meaning conquer. The rioters rampaged through the city, setting fire to major buildings including the original Hagia Sophia, and they proclaimed a new emperor. Justinian, trapped in his palace, seriously considered fleeing for his life. It was Theodora who reportedly steeled his resolve with her famous speech, declaring that royalty made a fine burial shroud and that she would never flee. Justinian's generals then devised a brutal plan. They lured the rebellious mob back into the hippodrome, the very place where the uprising had begun, under the pretense of announcing a new emperor. Once the gates were sealed, his troops moved in and slaughtered tens of thousands of men, trapped in the arena that had been the stage for their political power. The hippodrome, a place for interpreting the will of the people, had become a slaughterhouse for suppressing it. In the wake of such terror, you might think the power of the factions would have been broken forever, but the system was too deeply ingrained in Byzantine life. Instead, the relationship evolved. Emperors after Justinian became even more adept at manipulating the factions, not just as rivals to be controlled, but as instruments of their own rule. They learned that by playing the blues and greens against each other, they could divide and conquer the populace, preventing the kind of unified opposition that had nearly toppled Justinian. The emperor's presence in the Kathisma was a masterclass in political theater. He was not a passive observer, he was the ringmaster. He would arrive in a grand procession, offer gifts to the crowd, and lead ceremonies. His reactions during the races were performative, carefully calculated to show favor or displeasure. By associating himself so publicly with the spectacle, he was attempting to co-opt its power. He was saying, in effect, that the divine favor being interpreted through the horses was in fact a reflection of his own. If his team won, it was because he was blessed. If his team lost, it was a test of his virtue or the result of treachery, never a true withdrawal of celestial support. The spectacle of the race became a mechanism for the emperor to demonstrate his connection to both the people and the gods. A continuous, public referendum on his reign played out over the thundering rhythm of hooves and wheels. This transformation of a sporting event into a volatile political forum is one of history's most fascinating examples of animal interpretation. Unlike the quiet observation of a sacred bull's behavior or the careful reading of bird flight by Roman augurs, the omens of the hippodrome were deafening, public, and impossible to ignore. They were generated by the collective will of 100,000 people, focused through the proxy of horse and chariot. The system was messy, dangerous, and inherently democratic in its own chaotic way. It gave the common citizen, who had no vote in the modern sense, a powerful voice. That voice could be a cheer of support that bolstered an emperor's authority, or it could be a roar of dissent that threatened to burn the city to the ground. The horses, in their noble, unknowing participation, became the living, breathing symbols of this fragile contract between the ruler and the ruled. Their speed and the driver's skill were not just measures of athletic prowess. They were the needle on a political seismograph, registering the tremors of public opinion and divine will that could, at any moment, culminate in an earthquake that would either solidify an emperor's destiny or bury his reign in the dust and blood of the arena. While the hippodrome churned with the raw, immediate passions of the crowd, another creature soared above such earthly turmoil, offering a far more serene and profound promise to rulers. The phoenix, a being of fire and ash, presented a vision of power that was not just unassailable but eternal. Its entire existence was a lesson in resilience, a perfect cycle of death and rebirth that resonated deeply with monarchs whose greatest fear was not a single defeat, but the final, irreversible end of their lineage. This mythical bird, known in ancient Egypt as the Bennu and in China as the Fenghuang, did not give omens through its flight or its cries. Instead, its power as an interpreter of destiny was embedded in its very essence. It taught that destruction was not an end, but a prelude to a glorious new beginning, a narrative that anxious dynasties were desperate to claim as their own. In the sprawling, bureaucratic empire of China, the phoenix, or Fenghuang, was one of the four sacred creatures, a being of perfect virtue that appeared only in times of peace and under the rule of a sage emperor. Its arrival was the ultimate celestial endorsement, signaling that the emperor's mandate of heaven was secure and his governance was in harmony with the cosmos. Unlike the dragon, which represented the emperor's raw, masculine power, the Fenghuang was often associated with the empress and the principle of feminine grace and prosperity. Together, they represented a balanced and harmonious reign. When a dynasty was founded or restored after a period of chaos, court historians and propagandists would often document sightings of the Fenghuang or weave its image into the official art of the new regime. This was a powerful way to communicate to a war-weary population that the brutal interregnum was over, that the old, corrupt order had been purified by fire, and that a new, virtuous golden age was dawning. The phoenix allowed the new ruler to frame the bloody conflict that brought him to power not as a civil war, but as a necessary cosmic reset. The old dynasty had to burn away so that his new one, like the phoenix, could rise from the ashes more radiant and legitimate than before. The Romans, masters of co-opting the symbols of the peoples they conquered, eagerly adopted the phoenix from Egyptian mythology. They were particularly fascinated by its precise, cyclical lifespan. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing about the appearance of a phoenix in Egypt, noted the immense speculation about its 500-year life cycle. This numerical precision appealed to the Roman love of order and lent the creature an air of scientific marvel alongside its mythical power. For the Roman emperors, especially during the tumultuous period of the later empire, the phoenix became a symbol of the Aeternitas Imperii, the eternity of the empire. Even as individual emperors were assassinated, and as the empire split and reformed, the idea of Rome itself was portrayed as the phoenix. It might suffer terrible blows, but its essential spirit was immortal and would always be reborn. Emperor Hadrian, for instance, who faced a massive Jewish revolt that devastated the province of Judea, used symbols of rebirth and renewal extensively in his propaganda afterward, suggesting that the empire had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger and more unified. The phoenix offered a way to explain away disaster, to tell the Roman people that the collapse they witnessed was merely part of a grand, predestined cycle, and that their eternal city was, by its very nature, incapable of permanent death. This symbolism reached its most poignant use in the wake of genuine catastrophe. After a palace fire, a lost war, or a deadly plague, the appearance of the phoenix motif in imperial coins, statues, and edicts was a deliberate act of psychological statecraft. It was a message aimed at both internal dissidents and external enemies. To those thinking of rebelling, it was a warning: do not mistake this temporary setback for a permanent weakness. The dynasty is like the phoenix, and its power will only be reforged in the flames of this adversity. To foreign kings considering invasion, it was a declaration of invincible resilience. The phoenix allowed a monarch to reframe a narrative of vulnerability into one of inevitable triumph. A military defeat became a strategic purification. Our economic crisis became a necessary fire that burned away corruption, making way for a more robust system. The symbol gave rulers a divine license to fail, insulating them from the immediate consequences of their mistakes by placing their reign within a much larger cosmic story, where every ending was merely a new beginning in disguise. Ultimately, the phoenix stands as the most optimistic of all the mythical interpreters. It did not require a king to read entrails or chart bird flight. It did not demand the capture of a rare white elephant or the dangerous management of chariot factions. Its power was purely narrative. By aligning their personal story with the story of the phoenix, kings and emperors could tap into a deep, universal human longing for renewal and immortality. They could present themselves not as mere mortals sitting on a precarious throne, but as the current, living embodiment of an eternal principle that transcended any single human life. The fires of rebellion, invasion, and chaos were thus transformed in the royal propaganda from threats into a necessary part of the dynastic life cycle. The phoenix interpreted destiny by offering a story so powerful and so hopeful that it could convince an entire population to see collapse as a prelude to glory, and to place their faith in a dynasty that claimed it was, by its very nature, as perpetual as the mythical bird rising from its own ashes. This brilliant use of pure symbolism to shape perception leads us to a fascinating and cynical counterpart, where rulers, unsatisfied with interpreting destiny, decided to take the final step and manufacture it themselves. But what if the perfect animal interpreter didn't exist in the wild? What if a king, unsatisfied with the unpredictable nature of real beasts and the elusive whispers of mythical ones, decided to take the ultimate step to build his own? This is the story of the automata, the magnificent mechanical marvels that represent the final, and perhaps most cynical, chapter in the history of animals that spoke to kings. In an audacious act of technological hubris, rulers began to commission intricate clockwork creatures powered by hydraulics, steam, or elaborate systems of weights and gears to serve as completely controlled, utterly reliable artificial oracles. These were not just impressive toys, they were sophisticated tools of psychological warfare, designed to replace the fickle will of the gods with the predictable, programmable will of the monarch. If a real lion's roar could be interpreted as a divine message, then a mechanical lion's roar, timed for maximum dramatic effect, was a message from the king himself, delivered with the force of a celestial decree. The Byzantine throne room in the great palace of Constantinople was one of the most awe-inspiring stages for this technological theater. Imagine an ambassador from a rival kingdom, perhaps from Western Europe or a distant Eastern Empire, being granted an audience with the Byzantine emperor. He would be led through corridors of breathtaking opulence, past guards in glittering regalia, and finally into the immense golden hall of the Menagerie. There, the emperor would be seated upon the legendary throne of Solomon, a masterpiece of engineering disguised as a seat of power. As the ambassador approached, humbled by the sheer scale of the wealth on display, the emperor would give a subtle signal. Suddenly, the hall would fill with sound. On either side of the throne, massive golden lions, crafted with astonishing realism, would begin to stir. Their mechanical tails would swish, their heads would turn, and from their gaping jaws would issue a deep, resonant roar that echoed off the marble walls. At the same time, from a golden tree filled with jeweled birds, a chorus of melodious chirps and songs would erupt, the mechanical creatures fluttering their delicate metal wings. The intended effect was not merely to surprise, but to utterly overwhelm. the message was unambiguous. The man on this throne did not merely receive signs from nature, he commanded it. He had tamed the very laws of physics and mechanics, making lions and birds serve his will as easily as his human subjects. His wisdom was so profound that he could fabricate the voices of destiny itself, making him not just a king but a master of the cosmos. This practice of using automata as diplomatic weapons was perfected to an even greater degree in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, under the enlightened yet absolute rule of the Abbasid caliphs. The Abbasid Golden Age was a period of incredible scientific and mathematical innovation, and the court engineers, or Sahib al-Hiyul, were masters of their craft. They drew upon the knowledge of ancient Greek texts, Persian hydraulics, and Indian mathematics to create automata of breathtaking complexity. Caliphs like Harun al-Rashid and al-Mamun were known to use these creations to dazzle and intimidate foreign envoys. An ambassador might be presented with a life-sized, automated boat that sailed gracefully across a courtyard pool, crewed by mechanical figures that moved with uncanny precision. Or they might be confronted with a towering, humanoid figure that could rise and offer a cup of water, its movements fluid and silent. The most famous accounts describe a magnificent silver and gold tree, similar to the Byzantine one, but even more elaborate, with birds that not only sang but could be programmed to sing different songs at different times. The underlying message of these displays was a potent mix of the mystical and the technological. To a visitor from a less scientifically advanced culture, these moving, singing, drinking machines were indistinguishable from magic. The caliph was therefore not just a wealthy ruler, he was a sorcerer king whose access to knowledge was so vast it bordered on the divine. To challenge him was to challenge a man who could bring metal to life. This represents the ultimate corruption of the animal interpreter trope. For millennia, the core idea was that kings were passive recipients of a wisdom greater than themselves, channeled through the natural world. The white elephant, the Apis bull, the vision serpent, these were all forces that the king had to appease, interpret, and align with. His power was contingent on his ability to correctly read these external signs. The automata flipped this entire dynamic on its head. With a mechanical lion or a singing bird, the omen was no longer received, it was manufactured. The message was no longer interpreted, it was pre-written. The king was no longer a humble servant of destiny, he was its author and director. This was the pinnacle of control, the final solution to the problem of unpredictable animal behavior. Why worry about a sacred raven flying away when you could build one out of brass that would never leave its perch? Why fret over a white elephant falling ill when you could commission a gilded one that would stand in eternal, majestic silence? These fake interpreters removed the last vestiges of uncertainty from the divine right of kings, replacing faith with engineering and mystery with programming. The creation of these automata also reveals a fascinating shift in the source of royal legitimacy. In earlier eras, a king's power was derived from his connection to the spiritual realm, mediated by priests and shamans. With the rise of these mechanical wonders, power began to flow from a new source, technological supremacy. The most powerful king was not necessarily the most pious, but the one who could employ the most brilliant engineers, who had access to the rarest materials, and who could present a vision of the future so advanced it felt like magic to his contemporaries. The automata were a physical manifestation of this new ideology. They were proof that the kingdom was at the forefront of human knowledge, a civilization so advanced it could mimic and even improve upon the creations of nature itself. This was a powerful form of soft power, convincing potential allies and enemies alike that this was a nation destined to lead, because it had already mastered the secrets of the universe that others could not even comprehend. The artificial interpreter, therefore, was more than just a trick. It was a bold statement about where true power resided in the modernizing world, not in the temples, but in the workshops and libraries, all of which answered to the king. So if you look at the coat of arms of the United Kingdom, or the national emblem of Albania with its double-headed eagle, or even the lion on the Finnish flag, you are witnessing the direct, living descendants of those ancient animal interpreters. This is not a coincidence. Heraldry, which blossomed in the medieval period, was essentially a formalized visual language of power and destiny. When a knight rode into battle, his shield wasn't just a piece of armor. It was a billboard announcing his lineage, his virtues, and his divinely sanctioned right to rule his lands. The animals emblazoned upon it were carefully chosen characters in that story. A lion or lion rampant in heraldic terms was not just a picture of a big cat. It was a declaration of courage, authority, and royalty, a direct echo of the Lion of Judah or the chained beasts of the Moroccan sultans. An eagle soaring across a shield proclaimed imperial ambition, foresight, and a connection to the heavens, harking back to the augurs of Rome and the spirit eagles of the steppe khans. Even more complex creatures, like the wyvern or the griffon, told a story of a family's mythical origins or their claim to possess hybrid virtues, the courage of a lion combined with the wisdom of an eagle. This system allowed a noble family to literally wear their destiny on their sleeve, using a visual shorthand that everyone, from the lowest peasant to a rival king, could instantly understand. The animal was not just a symbol, it was a compressed narrative of a bloodline's right to power, a permanent public claim that they were guided and protected by the primal forces these creatures represented. This ancient symbolic language did not fade away with the age of knights and castles. It simply found new and powerful forms of expression in the modern world of mass media. Think about the massive global phenomenon of a series like Game of Thrones. The symbolism there is not subtle, and it is profoundly effective because it taps directly into this deep-seated historical tradition. The direwolf is not just a pet for the Stark children. From the very moment they find the pups in the snow, these creatures are established as inseparable from the Stark identity and fate. Their growth, their fortunes, and their tragic losses run in perfect, painful parallel with the fortunes of the human Stark family. When Robb Stark leads his armies into battle with his direwolf Grey Wind at his side, the image is pure heraldry come to life. The animal communicates the young king's connection to the old, wild powers of the north, his instinctual leadership, and his fierce loyalty. When Arya loses Nymeria but survives through her own wolf-like cunning, or when Bran's spirit literally merges with that of his direwolf Summer, the show is using this ancient trope in its most literal sense. The direwolves are interpreters of the Stark's destiny, their fates intertwined on a magical, almost cellular level. They are the modern equivalent of the spirit animals of the steppe khans, a physical manifestation of the family's soul and their predetermined path through a brutal world. And of course, we cannot talk about modern fantasy without acknowledging the ultimate mythical interpreter, the dragon. In countless stories, from the dragons of Pern to Smorg in The Hobbit, these creatures are not mere monsters to be slain. They are often the ultimate prize, the source of a king's legitimacy, or the physical embodiment of a kingdom's power. In Game of Thrones, the dragon eggs given to Daenerys Targaryen are initially just beautiful, fossilized curiosities. But their eventual hatching is the single most important event in her quest for the Iron Throne. It is not just the acquisition of a powerful weapon. It is the miraculous return of her family's sigil to living, breathing, fire-breathing life. Her dragons Drogon, Regal, and Viserion are the walking, flying proof of her bloodline's legendary and almost divine right to rule. They are her celestial mandate, much like the Chinese dragon was for the Son of Heaven. When she rides Drogon, she is visually and symbolically transforming from a displaced princess into a true queen. a ruler whose authority is literally written in scales and flame. The dragons interpret her destiny by making it undeniable to everyone who sees them. They silence political opposition through sheer awe, just as the mechanical lions of the Byzantine throne room were designed to do. Modern audiences understand this symbolism instinctively. We don't need a history lesson to grasp that a character with a dragon or a direwolf is someone touched by a larger, more magical fate. This is because these stories are drawing from a well of cultural memory that is thousands of years deep. This enduring appeal reveals something fundamental about the human psyche, a timeless narrative we seem hardwired to understand and embrace. There is a profound comfort, especially in times of uncertainty and chaos, in the idea that our leaders are not just making it up as they go along. The concept of an animal interpreter, whether it's a sacred bull, a prophetic raven, or a bonded direwolf, provides a sense of order. It suggests that the immense, terrifying responsibility of leadership is shared with, or guided by, a wisdom that is older, purer, and more connected to the natural world than mere human intellect. It externalizes the source of authority, placing it beyond the messy realm of human politics and ambition. A king who can correctly read the liver of a sheep or receive a vision from a serpent is a king who is in tune with the universe itself. This idea allows us to believe that power is not arbitrary, that it is part of a larger, more meaningful cosmic plan. The animal acts as a bridge between the fallible human ruler and the infallible divine will, making the concept of kingship feel less like a job and more like a sacred, preordained vocation. This psychological need helps explain why these tropes are so persistent, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the latest Hollywood blockbuster. We want to believe that the people in charge are there for a reason, and what better reason than a sign from the animal world itself? Now let's pull back the curtain on the entire magnificent spectacle. Beyond the golden cages and sacred temples lies a profound psychological truth about the nature of power itself. At its core, the reliance on animal interpreters was a brilliantly effective strategy for managing the immense, and often terrifying, burden of leadership. Imagine the weight on a single person's shoulders, the decision to send thousands to war, the gamble of a new tax that could spark famine, the fear of a drought that might topple a dynasty. In an age without modern science or polling data, these choices were made in a fog of uncertainty. By creating a system where a sacred bull's appetite or a bird's flight path could signal divine approval, a king effectively built a psychological support structure for his own rule. He was not alone in making these fateful calls. He was a partner with the gods, and the animal was their shared telephone line. This externalization of responsibility was a form of spiritual risk management. When a campaign succeeded, the king could bask in the glory, his divine connection confirmed. But when it failed, the system provided a built-in escape clause. The fault lay not with the monarch's flawed strategy, but with a misread omen, an inattentive priest, or the animal itself failing to properly convey the god's will. The king's core authority remained mystically intact, even when his earthly plans fell apart. The animal, in this sense, became the ultimate scapegoat, a divinely appointed shock absorber for the bumps and crashes of political fortune. This system also masterfully addressed the deep-seated human desire for order and meaning in a chaotic world. For the average farmer or artisan, life was at the mercy of forces far beyond their control: the weather, disease, the march of armies. The idea that their king was in constant, direct communication with the cosmic forces governing these events was profoundly comforting. It created a narrative of stability. It meant that someone was at the helm, someone who could read the map of destiny and steer the kingdom away from the rocks. A ruler who consulted a white elephant wasn't seen as superstitious. He was seen as responsible, taking every possible step to ensure the favor of the heavens for his people. This belief transformed the monarch from a mere political administrator into a vital spiritual intermediary. His well-being and his connection to his animal interpreter were matters of public safety. This is why the illness of a sacred creature could cause such widespread panic. It wasn't just an animal getting sick, it was the flickering of the divine pilot light that kept the entire kingdom safe and warm. The populace, in turn, was more likely to offer their loyalty and taxes to a king who performed this crucial cosmic service, making the animal interpreter not just a tool of control, but a key to civic cohesion and social stability. Furthermore, this practice served as a powerful tool for legitimizing power, especially for usurpers or founders of new dynasties who lacked a long, established bloodline. How do you convince a population that you, and not the ousted royal family, are the true, rightful ruler? You can't just say you have a better army. You need a story, a sign, an undeniable mark of divine favor. This is where the animal interpreter became a potent weapon of propaganda. A new emperor might discover that a rare phoenix had been sighted, symbolizing the rebirth of the nation under his guidance. A conquering Khan would trace his lineage back to a mythical blue wolf, providing a celestial origin story that predated and superseded any earthly noble title. These narratives, built around animals, were difficult to disprove and easy for the popular imagination to grasp. They created an aura of inevitability around the ruler. He wasn't just a man who had seized power. He was the man whom the gods, through their animal messengers, had always intended to hold it. This short-circuited political opposition by moving the debate from the messy realm of human politics to the unassailable realm of divine prophecy. To challenge the king was to challenge the oracle itself, an act of both treason and blasphemy that few would dare to attempt. The very nature of animal behavior also made it the perfect medium for this political theater. Unlike human advisors, an animal is inscrutable and seemingly impartial. A lion's roar or a raven's flight cannot be easily bribed or coerced. This perceived objectivity lent the omens a credibility that human counsel could never achieve. When a priest announced that the Apis bull had turned 3 times to the east, signaling a good harvest, who could argue? The animal's actions were a raw, unmediated data stream from the divine, filtered only through the priest's interpretation. This created a closed loop of authority. The king consulted the animal, the priest interpreted the animal, and the king acted on the interpretation. A successful outcome validated everyone involved and reinforced the entire system. This loop was incredibly resilient because it was self-sealing. It transformed the unpredictable and often random behavior of the natural world into a coherent, state-sanctioned language of power. The chirp of a bird was no longer just a chirp, it was a syllable in a divine decree, and the king was the only one licensed to read it. This process effectively monopolized the channel to the gods, centralizing spiritual authority in the throne and making the monarch the indispensable link between heaven and earth. In the end, these lost animal interpreters were far more than curiosities of history. They were the central processors in the ancient operating system of power, a technology of legitimacy that managed the psychology of the ruler, the fears of the populace, and the very narrative of destiny itself, all through the silent, powerful language of the beast. The world, however, was beginning to turn. A profound transformation was stirring in the intellectual centers of Europe, a slow but relentless tide of new thinking that would gradually pull the rug out from under this ancient, animal-centered view of power. This shift, often called the scientific revolution, championed a radical idea that the mysteries of the universe could be unlocked not by reading the entrails of a sheep or the flight of an eagle, but through careful, repeatable experiment and mathematical reasoning. Thinkers like Francis Bacon argued that knowledge should be built from the ground up, from observable facts, not handed down from ancient authorities or divine whispers. This new methodology was a direct challenge to the entire premise of the animal interpreter. Why rely on the ambiguous behavior of a sacred chicken to decide whether to go to war when you could instead consult accurate maps, census data on your population, and reports from spies about the enemy's troop strength? The old system was based on interpreting signs. The new one was based on collecting evidence, and for the practical business of running a state, evidence was beginning to look far more reliable. This intellectual earthquake found its institutional home in places like the Royal Society in London, granted its formal charter by King Charles II in 1660. Its motto, nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it, was a declaration of war on unverified tradition. Inside its halls, gentlemen and scholars did not debate the meaning of a raven's caw. Instead, they watched Robert Boyle's experiments with air pumps. They peered through microscopes at the unseen world, and they calculated the motions of the planets with unprecedented precision. The message was clear. Truth was not a secret to be decoded from animal behavior, but a set of laws to be discovered through human ingenuity. A king who supported the Royal Society was aligning himself with this new, potent source of authority, the authority of demonstrated fact. His power would now be seen to derive from his patronage of progress and his understanding of a knowable, mechanical universe, not from his unique ability to commune with the divine through a beast. The very foundation of the animal interpreter's role, that they provided access to a hidden, supernatural layer of reality, was being dismantled brick by brick in laboratories and lecture halls. Simultaneously, the political landscape of Europe was undergoing its own revolution. The idea of the divine right of kings, the very bedrock upon which the need for a celestial signifier was built, was being vigorously challenged. The Glorious Revolution in England in 1688 established the principle that a monarch's power was not absolute and God-given, but conditional and granted by Parliament. The American and French revolutions would later take this even further, arguing that sovereignty resided not in a crowned head, but in the people themselves. As monarchies became constitutional, their legitimacy was increasingly derived from documents like the English Bill of Rights or a written constitution, not from the possession of a white elephant or the favorable chirping of temple geese. A president or a prime minister does not need a sacred bull to prove they have the mandate to rule. They have an election. The political contract was being rewritten, moving the source of power from the heavens to the populace, and in this new secular framework, there was simply no official job opening for a prophetic animal. This great transition was famously described by the German sociologist Max Weber as the disenchantment of the world. He argued that the modern age was characterized by a gradual retreat of magical, mystical, and religious interpretations of reality, replaced by a focus on rationality, bureaucracy, and scientific causation. The enchanted world was one where a tree could be home to a dryad, a storm could be the wrath of a god, and a lion's roar could be a political statement. The disenchanted world is one where a tree is a biological organism, a storm is a meteorological event, and a lion's roar is a territorial vocalization. In this new, disenchanted cosmos, animals were gradually relocated from their roles as active, conscious participants in the drama of human destiny to their modern status as subjects of biological study or, at best, beloved companions. Their voices fell silent in the corridors of power because the people in those corridors had decided collectively that the animals had never truly been speaking at all. We can see the poignant remnants of this lost world in the traditions that survived as hollowed-out ceremonial shells. The ravens at the Tower of London are the perfect example. Today, they are a beloved tourist attraction cared for by the yeoman warder known as the Raven Master. People visit them, take photographs, and enjoy the Gothic romance of the legend. But their wings are still clipped, a haunting physical echo of a time when the entire nation genuinely believed that their escape would lead to its collapse. That belief has been largely drained of its power, replaced by a sense of charming historical pageantry. The ravens are no longer considered the actual interpreters of Britain's destiny. They are a living monument to a time when people believed such interpreters were necessary. The same could be said for the surviving royal menageries that evolved into public zoos. The animals are still there, but the purpose of their display has utterly changed. We go to see them now to learn about biodiversity and conservation, or simply for wonder and entertainment, not to gauge the health of the monarchy or to be intimidated by the global reach of an absolute sovereign. This disenchantment was not a single event that happened overnight, but a slow, centuries-long process of erosion. It was the cumulative effect of countless small changes: a ship's captain trusting a sextant over the appearance of a dolphin, a farmer relying on an almanac based on astronomy rather than the behavior of ants, a doctor following a medical textbook instead of prescribing a potion made from a unicorn's horn. Each of these small acts of faith in a rational, predictable universe chipped away at the authority of the old omens. The world did not lose its magic in a single moment, but rather, the magic steadily retreated from the public square into the private realms of art, literature, and personal spirituality, leaving the business of state and science to operate by a new, more systematic set of rules. The age of the animal interpreter, a period that spanned millennia and connected the pharaohs to the sultans and the emperors of Rome to the khans of the steppe, had finally drawn to a quiet close, not with a bang, but with the reasoned, methodical whisper of scientific progress. From the sacred bulls of Egypt to the prophetic ravens of London, these lost animals were far more than mere pets or simple symbols. They were vital, active instruments of power, woven into the very fabric of royal legitimacy and cosmic connection. For the kings and emperors who relied on them, these creatures provided a tangible language for destiny itself, a way to translate the inscrutable will of the gods into actionable political strategy. They allowed a ruler to stand before his people and his rivals and project an undeniable image of divine favor, suggesting that his decisions were not merely his own, but were guided by a wisdom older and greater than any human counsel. In an era of immense uncertainty, where a single poor harvest or lost battle could topple a dynasty, these animal interpreters offered a psychological and spiritual anchor, a way for a monarch to navigate the crushing responsibilities of leadership with the confidence that he was not walking his path alone. Our modern world has, of course, largely replaced these ancient oracles with different systems of authority. We now place our trust in the cold, predictable logic of scientific inquiry and the structured frameworks of constitutional law. A nation's health is measured by economic data and polling numbers, not by the appetite of a sacred chicken. A leader's legitimacy is derived from election results and legal statutes, not from the discovery of a white elephant. The Great Disenchantment, as the sociologist Max Weber called it, has quieted the mystical voices that once echoed through palace courtyards. Yet, the legacy of these animal interpreters is far from extinct. It endures vibrant and powerful in the stories we tell and the symbols we hold dear. It lives on in the lions and eagles that stand guard on our national flags and corporate logos, silently communicating the same virtues of courage and vision they once did for kings. It soars through our most beloved fantasy epics, where dire wolves and dragons are not just special effects, but essential characters that bind a hero to their preordained fate, directly channeling that ancient, deep-seated need for a guide from the natural world. So the next time you see a lion emblazoned on a coat of arms, or feel a thrill when a dragon fills the screen in a film, pause for a moment. Remember the pharaohs, sultans, and emperors who truly believed that such creatures held the literal keys to their thrones and their fates. Remember the intricate, beautiful, and often brutal dance of power and belief that connected a human ruler to an animal, turning a simple beast into a living argument for a dynasty's right to rule. This enduring fascination reveals a timeless thread in the human story, our longing to believe that leadership can be touched by something magical, that the right to power is written not just in law books, but in the very world around us. If you found this journey into the intersection of myth and monarchy as captivating as we did, we have many more deep dives into historical mysteries waiting for you. Please subscribe to the channel to join us on the next adventure, and we would love to hear from you. Share your own favorite legendary creature from history or folklore in